What's the worst case of rich brat syndrome that you've ever seen? I worked as a bouncer at a high-end nightclub. The biggest moron of a rich kid, straight out of Malibu's Most Wanted, gets a VIP booth and bottle service, racks up a massive bill trying to act like a baller. His credit card gets denied and he has to call his dad to come down at 1:30 a.m. because he can't order any more bottles. His dad comes down in his pajamas, obviously ashamed and furious at this D-bag of a kid, ends up embarrassing the crap out of him in front of his whole group of friends. He takes the kid's keys and is about to leave when the kid makes some crappy comment and goes back into the club. The dad's about to walk away after he apologizes for his son when we offer to drag him out the rough way. Dad smiles and accepts. That kid hit every door and every step on the way out. That was one of my most satisfying experiences working at that club. Don't know if this qualifies as rich kid syndrome, but when I got out of the Navy, I decided to use my GI Bill at one of the Penn State satellites. I was sitting in the cafeteria drinking coffee and typing up a paper when a girl sits down across from me and opens up her backpack. She pulls out a sandwich bag and looks at it in disgust and then looks me dead in the eye and says, "I don't even know why I bother. My mother never cuts off the crust." I let out one of those high-pitched, short laughs like, "Is this girl for real?" And oblivious to the tone of it, she says, "I know, right?" Then asks me if I want it. I looked around thinking I was getting pranked or something because this crap is too stereotypical to be real, and I just assumed I was being filmed. She shook it at me and gave me a, "Well, look." So I said, "Screw it," and took the sandwich. She then pulled out her student ID card and brought a crap ton of French fries. That sandwich was awesome. I think the bread was homemade and it was stacked like a dagwood. It had all kinds of expensive-looking meats and Dijon mustard, serious gourmet stuff. I know this girl's mother will never see this, but I just want to say someone appreciated that sandwich. A 12-year-old family friend got an iPhone XS for his birthday, then deliberately shattered his iPhone 8. In high school, a kid was bragging that he got in his third fender bender in his old car. It was only 3 years old. His parents had given him that, but he hated it, so his parents were buying him an entirely new, current-year car to incentivize him to drive better. Ugh. I need to say first off the bat that this is about my best friend, and she is the best person I know. Like, not normally rich brat or anything like that. I was complaining about how I was short on money one month, I just couldn't go out to eat, because I had to pay rent and pay for tag renewal all in the same paycheck. She looked at me super seriously and was like, "Oh, don't worry, they send you the tags in the mail for free." And after a long discussion, she learned that in fact, her mum had been paying for her new tags every year. Yeah, there are entitled rich kids who decide that mummy and daddy's money makes them better than everyone else, and then there are people like this. Not especially mean or bad, and from your testimony, really nice. Just a bit sheltered from some of the aspects of the world by it all. Bless them. Hopefully they use all that privilege to make a positive difference in the world. Oh, this one wasn't too bad, and it is a bit funny as well. I became friends with a kid whose family was really well off. He was a nice bloke, but a bit sheltered, and university was the first time he really had any independence. But he had very little sense of what the value of $1 really was, since his folks got him what he usually wanted, compared to what normal people would spend. There was one particular time he wanted us to eat at a restaurant, and he assured us, "It's really good." So we all rocked up to this place, and the price for main courses started at $40 to $60, which, as poor uni students, we couldn't afford. But when he realized this, he was so embarrassed he got his folks to pay for it. He's finally wised up a few years later once he got more independence away from his family and made his own money. He remains one of the best guys I know. My mum's friend used to buy new clothes each season and throw out the old ones. She had to be taught by her husband to save them for the next year. This was way back in the 50s. Her family was very rich, and he was just a normal guy. Worked with this kid who was a good guy, but completely disconnected from financial reality for most people. He'd just moved out west from another state and was trying to get on like a normal adult. He went to buy a new car and was shocked that they couldn't just bill his dad for it since they didn't know him. He ordered a bottle of wine at a restaurant and the sommelier said, "Certainly, sir." Then the sommelier whispered, "Just for your knowledge, sir, the bottle is $700. He looked straight at the guy and asked, "Is that a lot?" The sommelier honestly didn't know how to answer. Good kid, and he got a lot better, but he just didn't know. Once he casually told his mum he needed some help with bills, and she just deposited $20,000 into his bank account. My parents had a dilemma because they both bought each other new Mercedes for Valentine's Day. A guy looked at my $2,000 Beta car in college and commented that it must have been really cheap and guessed $15,000. For anyone curious, it was a Kia Rio 2005 with 120,000 miles on it. I'd have offered to sell it to him as a demolition car or something for that price. I worked at a Starbucks and we hired a new guy who I was training. At one point, I had to show him how to clean the restrooms. I grabbed the bleach and handed him a pair of gloves, and he looks at me in disgust and says, "We don't have a maid to clean the bathrooms?" He quit the next day. Oh, so many entitled rich kids in my life to choose from. When I was in boarding school, one of my co-boarders handed me some mail saying, "Do you notice anything special about this envelope?" And when I checked it out, I realized his face was on the stamp. He was royalty. Then there was the kid from Taiwan also attending the same boarding school. My advent calendar had little chocolates, his had a remote-control car, a Sega Game Gear, and a few other things. Another teenager, age 16, was arguing on the phone to his grandfather that he didn't want a Porsche, he wanted the Ferrari. Went to a destination wedding in Mexico resort. Rich kids rented a golf cart, tore through the streets and flipped the cart, injuring people and causing a huge commotion and traffic jam. A Mexican lady comes out and begins to scold them for their behavior. "You wouldn't act this way at home." And the rich kid responds, "Oh, I promise you, we do." It was the earnestness of his reply that got to me. He really believed he was placating her with that response. There's got to be a German word for something being funny because the other party is aloof to their own behavior. I knew a girl whose allowance was $90 a day. She got into trouble, so they cut it to $90 a week. How old was she? I'm assuming this was high school. How did she manage to spend $30K a year? Well, she was a teenager, she lived in Manhattan, so that explains a little bit at least. One girl from my high school got chest implants for her 18th birthday. Her mum joined her as a mother-daughter bonding activity, followed by the daughter getting a brand new 90 grand Mercedes as a high school graduation gift. Went to high school with this unsufferably spoiled kid. Family had a couch in their home's elevator, and classical European sculpture. This was in the US. The kid talked down to and about the less fortunate on a regular basis, once made fun of me for picking up a coin off the ground. I work for a dentist and her son is a spoiled brat. He was at the office one day because she had to bring him into an appointment later that day. He got bored and went out wandering around some of the local shops. He came back a little while later, and without any preamble, he walked up to her and said, "Give me $80. She asked him what it was for, and he just repeated himself, so she gave it to him. He was 17 at the time of this incident. The father is in the picture, but my boss, the dentist, is the main breadwinner and disciplinarian of the family. The husband is more like another of her children and just works here and there and lives off her money. She tries to act tough and instill certain morals and values in her kids, but then turns around and caves to all of their demands. For example, her twin daughters are going to university next year, and instead of staying in a dorm, they demanded a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment. They refused to share a bedroom or even a bathroom. At first, she told them absolutely not, but they whined and complained, so she caved. This will be a 2-bed, 2-bathroom apartment in Toronto, by the way, where rent prices are through the roof. My boss is very much about appearances, and from a young age, she got her kid accustomed to a privileged lifestyle. She created monsters. And yes, for those of you writing in, they are totally like Jean-Ralphio and Mona Lisa Saperstein. That family sounds pampered as hell, and I think those kids are gonna be monsters. I shudder at what money is doing to those people, but I do appreciate you pointing out how close they are to the worst people in Pawnee, Indiana. This is pretty tame, but it's what I've got. I used to work as an after-school babysitter for a loaded doctor with a couple of kids. My job was mainly to pick up the younger kid from school and hang out until his parents got home. He was a good kid, but coddled and immature. He was in 5th or 6th grade at this point. Oftentimes, he'd not be at his classroom when I came to get him, and the school campus was huge. Different buildings, courtyards, playgrounds, the works. If he wasn't at his classroom, I had to comb the whole campus, and he was rarely in the same place twice. He had a cell phone, but usually ignored its existence except for playing games on it in the car. The school was in the city, and I had to park on the street. A couple of times I wound up with parking tickets because, despite having stuffed the meter with enough quarters to presumably result in ample time, the search for my charge would take much longer than anticipated. After a point, I mentioned this to him, calmly asking that he respect my time and stay in a set location so that I don't end up with a $25 ticket again. He looked at me with a good-natured shrug and said, "Well, that's not much. You can afford that. Sonny, your parents paid me $140 a week and I was in college. I know you live in a $1.4 million house and your dad buys you an expensive new toy every Sunday, but with the money they're forking over for your education, someone ought to have taught you the value of a dollar bill by now." But honestly, he was a nice kid. They've moved away and I hope he's doing well. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. This kid in high school was whining, and I mean literally whimpering, that he had to wait something like 6 weeks for his custom-built BMW to come over from Germany. A friend of mine inherited a lot of money, enough to buy a house, and he spent it on 2 cars. A Subaru completely modded to Ken Block's version of it, and some BMW, both of them extremely expensive. We asked him a few months later why he didn't buy a house with it because he still lived with his parents. So he told us he already owned a penthouse, he just didn't want to move yet. I wonder what happens to people like him. Does he sustain his lifestyle? Does he just die off because he did something stupid? I believe somewhere I read a theory that family money usually lasts 3 generations. The first one starts it, the second one maintains it, and the third one blows it. Oh, I could absolutely survive on my own. My parents just pay for my food and house, but I pay for everything else. If I got a job, I could pay for my food and house too. They said at 18 in the middle of a discussion between 2 middle-class peers who were talking about saving money because they had to pay for their own college and living expenses. About 5 minutes prior to this conversation, both peers had ordered the cheap dinner options and declined a shopping trip later that night, while Rich Girl was talking non-stop about buying the best and most expensive souvenirs for her friends. They once tried working a regular person retail job and quit within a couple of weeks as it just wasn't right and I didn't like it. Read, it gave them actual responsibilities for the first time. They moved cross-country for an 8-month education course where her parents paid food, rent, and school. They also gave her a debit card which replenishes up to $500 when it hits 50. She still posts Snapchats with the captions of "that broke person life" over pictures of her getting Starbucks every day and insists that she could survive on her own. Constantly suggests the most expensive options for meals, activities and stuff, and then tacks on things like, "Oh, we can just split the bill. I know you're saving, but it's just," and then the amount is at least $50. "You'll be fine, right?" Then she gets upset when people can't afford to spend time with her, or when someone dares to suggest that she help cover costs. That is surreal. It's like her affluence hasn't taught her how to live among the lesser fortunate and make her seem super cheap. I've only known one rich kid syndrome, but he too was super cheap and manipulative when it came to money. Some of the most generous people I know are the most poor. They know what it means to share, because if it wasn't for the kindness of others, sharing with them, they could have died. Friends got a theater with an arcade built over their family's 12-car garage. The parents didn't want the 5-year-old sister to be jealous, so they hired an architect to design and build her a functioning playhouse with a bathroom, AC, and a bedroom. That was just the tip of the iceberg with this family, though. I'll try to round out the image, and for what it's worth, no, neither I nor my family are rich. We just lived really close to the family, and my dad and mother became close friends with them. They were, on the whole, really nice and innocent people drunk on the spoils of wealth. I can say I genuinely love the family. Firstly, these are not normal rich people, these are ultra-rich. Probably richer now than they were then. For example, George Bush Jr. visited the family house to hold a fundraiser for his second campaign. The father built a mini racetrack for his Lotus Esprit at his lake house. Also, a mega yacht with a garage for what most of us would consider a large boat on it. Surprise, he never really used the boat more than once or twice. It was an impulse purchase. The house, more aptly called a castle, was filled with game from African safaris taken in the 70s and 80s. The wife bought a popular fast food franchise unavailable in our area because she didn't like having to drive 30 minutes to get what she wanted. Once when I was swimming in the waterfall pool with the son, my mum called and reminded them I need to be home for some sports evening or something, and we hopped in their Bentley, dripping wet. It was the first time my feet ever touched a fur floor in a car, soaking wet at that. At the Millennium, the father was into tattoos and regularly spent tens of thousands to fly the best tattoo artists in the world in from Japan and LA to work on his Yakuza-style sash tattoo. I could go on and on. But the number one thing that I think might qualify one in the family for rich kid syndrome is that the father who inherited his family business from his father sold the business overseas in the late 80s. The company was the only reason that town had to exist. Ever since, the community has been recognized as the most depressed in the state, and the school's unequivocally the worst. My fiance's cousin, he managed to crash 4 cars while still in high school because his father would just replace them. When he moved into college, he got kicked out of several apartments for owning dogs when they weren't permitted. He told me he didn't care though, since his father also funded his continuous stream of new housing. From what I last heard, his father is now paying for his long-standing white snow habit. Knew this one guy at my college who didn't understand why everyone was so worked up about the student loans. I remember him saying something along the lines of, "Why don't people just pay the tuition up front?" He was also quite sheltered. Haha, well, at least the one thing that people of any wealth or background have in common is that when they have an overwhelming opinion of their own intelligence on the matter, they'll try and solve complex problems prefaced with the words, "Why don't they just?" When I hear those words, I immediately know that I'm likely to hear a take that will make anyone remotely educated in the subject at hand faceplant. I wouldn't say rich kid, but definitely spoiled brat who thought he was rich. Befriended him in 5th grade over our interest in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. First time I hung out at his place, I noticed just how littered with stuff his room was, some of it even unopened. I showed him some rare card that I'd recently pulled from a pack. He got super jealous and angry that I wouldn't trade or sell it to him. He immediately got up and walked over to the family computer and booted up a site where you could buy cards and various other toys and such. Completely ignoring having me over, he's now on an online shopping spree adding stuff to the cart. After adding a few things, he yells, "Where's the credit card?" And immediately his older sister comes running up the stairs to yell, "Kyle, Mom said no more buying stuff online," and closes the website and shuts off the computer. Kyle then proceeds to have a crying tantrum on the floor, and I'm just standing over there in shock at what's happening and how he's acting. I slowly stopped hanging out with him until completely avoiding him as his temperament got worse. Kid wasn't even rich either if I remember correctly, both of his parents were cops. I have a teenage cousin who made fun of me because I can't and won't drop $1,000 on Yeezys. Babysat some rich kids. A couple of gems were when we were watching a movie and she said somebody was ugly because they were poor. Another was that they left their stove at the side of the road for hobos. This kid was 11. Look, I have no issues with things being set out at the side of the road, and I wouldn't hesitate to grab something and leave things out myself. It was the hobo thing that irked me. I went to school with a crazy rich kid. His parents divorced and each decided to buy his love. Mommy owned a real estate agency, so she got him a license and spoon-fed him enough sales for a 6-figure income. Then Dad bought him a magazine. Yes, the dad bought a magazine for his 24-year-old white snow-addicted son to run. That worked out about as well as you'd imagine. I have a cousin like that. Her parents have always just bought her whatever job she's kind of interested in. In high school, they opened a Dairy Queen so she'd have a place for her first job. They've bought her a clothing store and an interior design business/home decor store. And now that she's got kids and less time to work, they bought like 4 condos for her to use as Airbnb properties. The only good thing is when she gets bored. Her stepbrother takes over and finds qualified people to run the businesses, so other people are ending up with nice jobs. So my best friend's wife teaches at a ritzy $40,000 per year private school, as in $40,000 a year for elementary and middle school. I think the high school is like $50,000. Well, she teaches 7th or 8th grade, I can't remember, and she said she always goes around the class after the summer break and asks them what they did over the summer, and she particularly remembers one kid complaining about how much his summer sucked because he was stuck on his parents' yacht all summer and they didn't even take it anywhere cool, just Italy. One of my college classmates wrecked his Range Rover over winter break and came back in an Aston Martin. Whenever a young celebrity posts a picture of a house they just bought, "That house isn't nice, my cousin's house is way nicer." This girl would always brag about how she's been to every continent except Antarctica, and she's visited so many countries. Then she wondered why people call her the rich kid and insisted she wasn't even that rich. The guy buys $500 headphones from a vending machine because he lost his old pair. Like, who buys from a frickin' tech vending machine impulsively? It was in a university campus, not an airport, and the guy bought Beats, so not audiophile or noise cancelling. I was tossing the football in my friend's place and we almost hit his expensive TV. His response was, "Don't worry, Dad'll just buy me another one." Luckily, the only rich kids I knew were the most outstandingly well-behaved boys I've ever met. I was a youth leader in a ministry for middle schoolers, and I think the worst it ever got was them being mildly disruptive at times. But these kids had a literal half-sized basketball court in their basement, along with a basement the size of a comfortable two-bedroom apartment, an arcade, a fully stocked second fridge, and don't even get me started on the house itself and the yard. This place easily zestimated between 1.4 to 1.9 million in 2019. But the next most expensive house I found in the area was listed for 1.4 million. The average home in this particular town costs between 400 and 500k, so it's still pretty lavish compared to what everyone else around them has. But they'd share it with all the kids in the group and never ever look down on anyone for not having money like them. These boys even helped me change a flat tire on my car because they felt like it was useful to know how. They literally could probably afford a tow truck and a tire repair all in the same day if it ever happened to them. They were so well grounded that it made me feel like I was the spoiled brat at times. In middle school, we were asked to draw our homes for some assignment and hand it in at the end of class. A popular, extremely wealthy kid that sat behind me raised his hand and smugly asked the teacher for another sheet of paper because he couldn't draw it all on one page. His friends just snickered, but I was cringing. Even at 12, I remember thinking it was such a snobby thing to say. What is a dumb stereotype about your country that is 100% false?
Romania. Many people believe we have vampires, but in my 700 years of living here, I haven't seen one. I asked my mates back in the castle, and they also haven't seen any, and they've been around for many more centuries than I.
That Welsh people do the deed with sheep. Listen, the temptation's there, but the static shock wouldn't be worth it. That Finland doesn't exist. I saw some devs stream a strategy game that dynamically generated country names as they formed or were conquered. The Finnish viewers were not happy that Finland became Swedish Russia. No, Italians aren't all short, black-haired fat mobsters that wear wine-stained tank tops and copulas. We are loud though, and yes, we gesture a lot. Iceland was not named as a part of some conspiracy to keep people away from a good thing. The name comes from the fact that early settlers arrived during summer and then suffered horrible losses of livestock and people once the winter hit, and icebergs were seen filling the fjords. It was more of a warning than anything that this place sucked. Greenland, on the other hand, was probably named as such to make it sound more hospitable. Parts of Greenland were actually fairly green when it was named in 1000 AD, at least in the southwest corner where Eric the Red landed, thanks to the Gulf Stream taking a slightly different route back then. Kenyans are all long-distance runners. They live in huts, speak no English, and have pet wild animals. So here goes. The long-distance guys are mainly from one of the communities or tribes called the Kalenjin, that's about 15% of the population. Next, Kenya is still a developing nation with a lot of poverty, but there's also a lot of modern architecture. The country is rated 18 out of 100 on the English Proficiency Index. And lastly, you can apply for a social and rarely granted permit for your bobcat named Babu, but keeping wildlife is not at all common. And the Kenya Wildlife Services will conduct regular visits to ensure Babu isn't being kept in Meowschwitz-like conditions. There was a popular documentary in the US about Kenyan runners, and they basically lied. They said that Kenyans ran long distances to schools, whilst completely failing to mention that most Kenyans take the school bus, and the kids they were featuring were running to school as training, not because they had to. Yeah, I feel like this comment is the condensed experience of going to a Trevor Noah stand-up comedy gig, and it's a message that still needs spreading in 2025. There are a lot of people all over the world who have very stilted views towards the entire continent of Africa. Also, it should be noted that the narrator will be doing accents for only a few of these, as doing bad comedy voices for every country of the world is probably a great way to make more enemies than I already have. People generally assume that when you're from Belgium, you're French-speaking. While a big part of the country is Francophone, the majority population is Flemish or Dutch-speaking. I blame this on three factors mostly. People mainly visiting Brussels, which is bilingual but has a Francophone majority, Americans mostly having been stationed in the French-speaking part in World War II, and Hercule Poirot. Greece is not only beaches and islands, we also have beautiful places for the winter, many mountains and mainland attractions. Every corner has something interesting. That it's always hot in Australia. It's not. It goes from hot to cold. There's no other temperature except for a few days of the year. That crumpets and tea make you posh.
I can get 9 crumpets for a quid from my local Asda. It's far from posh.
The myth is that everyone here is always drunk on vodka and people ride bears, play on balalaikas and dance the kazachok, and that we're either drunk or mad. While there is problem with alcoholism, a lot of people don't drink, especially not vodka. Funnily enough, bears do appear, but very rarely. And the people that ride bears have them as pets? No, they're considered unusual by other Russians. Balalaika is dead, I know one person that plays it, and that's it. We dance the kazachok, only ironically at this point. We're not always mad, we're just people, with emotions. But ushankas are great and warm, so people do wear them. Not all of them, though, and also we're not all super people. All of our country is just green herb and red light districts. Yes, we have these things, but the Netherlands has lots of culture. That Mexico is a desert. The Yucatan is fully rainforest. It's where jaguars come from. Never mind the huge swaths of pine forests in the middle of the country too, particularly around Mexico City. A lot of people confuse different European countries. For Switzerland, you're often Swedish. I'd imagine it's similar for Belgium and Bulgarians and Slovakia and Slovenians. I'm from Serbia, and people used to try and convince me it's a part of Russia. That's Siberia. That everyone in Vietnam still harbors resentment against Americans, or the French, or the Japanese, or you get the point. I've lived in Saigon my whole life, and I've never actually met anyone here who holds such grudges. It's pretty inspiring, actually. Could probably learn a lot from that. That the Irish are the biggest drunks in the world is completely false and mean, as we're only the second biggest drinkers in the world, but we hope to get the first place next year. In terms of pure ethanol from all sources consumed per capita, Moldova wins with 15.2 litres per capita per year. That Inuit still live in igloos. The Prime Minister's igloo has been closed for renovations since 2019. That all Germans have some secret knowledge of the Second World War that they'd love to share. I always found that interesting when I lived in London. Especially English people over 40 would ask me for some first-hand experiences from the war. Keep in mind that not even my parents were born at that time. The facts we know are the same ones you do from your history classes and stuff. That we say shrimp on the Barbie. It was an ad campaign to appeal to Americans. It was the most successful tourism campaign still to this day, but literally no one in Australia says that. As an authentic Aussie, let me tell you a story about Foster's as well. A friend of mine owned me a slab of beer, and he arrived at my house with a slab of Foster's. My other mates and I looked around at each other and said, "Why did you buy that?" He explains that maybe we should try something different. We all seem a little sus about it when my mate suddenly says he'll return it for something else. Days later, he goes back to the bottle shop and asks the cashier if he can exchange the Foster's slab for a different beer. He also says he lost the receipt for the Foster's, but the cashier replies, no, that's alright. I remember you. You're the guy who bought the Foster's slab." That everyone drinks maple syrup, and there are moose everywhere saying, "Sorry," all the time. That leprechauns are real, and we're a nation of alcoholics. Alright, that last one might actually be true. I swear to God, if someone says Ireland is part of the UK though, one more time. That everyone plays soccer and knows how to dance samba, that there are monkeys in the streets, and that the capital is Rio de Janeiro. That sheep roam the highways here in New Zealand. To be fair, I've had to stop for sheep on the highway just out of Wanganui. Same. That Brazil is a huge tropical jungle in which people speak Spanish. Brazil actually has several major cities and different environments. Sao Paulo, for instance, is a huge sprawling metropolis with about as many inhabitants as New York and LA combined. In many southern areas of the country, it actually snows on occasion, and we're a Portuguese colony, so we speak Portuguese. Most people don't realize how fricking massive Brazil is. Its northernmost point is closer to Canada than its southernmost point. Yes, the narrator was embarrassingly old when he learned that Brazilians spoke Portuguese rather than Spanish. And he's constantly surprised when he learns how massive a lot of the South American countries are. It's an ongoing learning journey. Dracula is often depicted as living in Transylvania, and while he was imprisoned there for a while, he was actually the ruler of Wallachia, another historic Romanian province that neighbors Transylvania to the south. As for the rumor that we're vampires, I neither confirm nor deny this statement. Thank you for reading, mortals. I mean friends. People think British people are either stiff upper lip public schoolboys or cockney bricklayers and football hooligans. There's a whole world of people in between. Some of us don't even like football. One of my friends doesn't even drink tea. Not sure why she's my friend, to be honest. That the Germans don't have humor and we live to work. Also, that our trains are always on time. As someone who often relies on the Deutschbahn to get around, that seems like a cruel joke. French here. That we don't shower. We do, guys, we're not in the 1700s anymore. Also that French women don't shave. I mean, there's some that don't, but this has more to do with their personal choices and a general trend of having more and more women that don't shave around the world than their inherent Frenchness. Oh, and that we're unfaithful too. I see that stereotype all the time on the internet. I don't think we're more unfaithful than our European neighbors or even Americans. We do eat frogs and snails, though. Oh, so much, according to popular opinion, I should be a green herb-smoking, clog-wearing tulip farmer living in a windmill. Can you guess where I'm from yet? Not exactly myth, but decent amounts of people still think that Czechoslovakia exists. We split apart in 1993. We're the Czech Republic, not Czechoslovakia anymore. To make it clear, the Czech Republic, shortcut Czechia, and Slovakia are two different countries. And FYI, Slovakia and Slovenia are also two different countries. They're not even neighboring countries. I've never seen a mime in Paris. To all the people who say they've seen a mime in Montmartre, Champs-de-Mars, or Champs-Élysées, that one time they were in Paris, yes. If you go to the most touristy place in the city, obviously you'll see some of them trying to rip off tourists. What I meant is that when you actually live there, they aren't a normal thing to come across.
Well, did you check behind the invisible wall?
That we're all sad, there's no sun, and there's always snow. Sincerely, any of the Nordic countries. Australian here, glad you asked. Everyone thinks it's dangerous as F, that spiders, drop bears, snakes, feral cats, and dogs will rip your freaking heart out every time you step out the door. The truth is that unless you act like a half-wit, poke said snake or spider with your finger, then you'll be fine. Battle echidna, dervish spiders, saltwater crocodiles, and drop bears just don't live in suburbia. You need to go into the bush to even see a lizard, which usually promptly F's off the moment a stone-footed Oompa Loompa waddles past them. I mean, sure, it's not as dangerous as people believe unless you go looking for the dangerous crap. However, I've seen plenty of Australians talking about finding huntsman spiders inside their houses, and that's enough to stay the F away for me. Another myth is that we lost the Emu War. We didn't just lose, we got frickin' demolished. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. That we roam around with wild animals like lions and rhinos, have no cities and thus live in huts, and that we're all poor and malnourished. Don't forget that Africa, the most ethnically and culturally diverse continent, is supposedly one big homogeneous country. I had to tell my cousins in the UK that no, unfortunately we don't ride kangaroos to school and work every day in Australia. Pfft, nobody thinks that Australians work every day. That we're all ginger alcoholics who hate the English and run around the hills in our skirts screaming, "Freedom!" When I started dating my now wife, who's from Oklahoma, she informed me that her friends and family were convinced that Canadians didn't have ice or toilet paper. They wanted her to ask me about it because apparently they were confused by that. I'd never laughed so hard. I mean, it's Canada. We're ice 70% of the year, basically. Nigeria. That everyone here is into scamming people. Huh. As a Nigerian, I mean, there is a prevalence of internet scams compared to most other countries. That Indians don't speak English. I was once asked how I'm so good at English. Like we're literally the second largest English-speaking country. I know, right? I'm far more fluent in English than my first language, and people are very surprised when I tell them I'm from India.
That the only thing we care about is rugby, and we all live in hobbit holes. I, for one, am absolutely terrified of rugby, but I'm Kiwi as, bro.
That we are all rude if you don't speak French, we don't shower or shave, and we all like wine, cheese, and baguettes, and France can be summarized as Paris. Genuine conversation I had in a bar with a Frenchman in Cantal. Do you know who we French hate the most? Oh, here we go. It's us English, right? No. Germans? No. Americans? No. I give up. Parisians. To somewhat counter your point, we were drinking wine in a village next to a shop that only made baguettes. You know what? That last point does make me feel like I have more in common with the French, because literally every country in the world seems to hate the denizens of the capital if they don't live there. They're just like us, guys. Woohoo, Singaporean here. First, no, we're not part of China. We're not even in the same region. Yes, the population is 60% ethnically Chinese, but that doesn't make us a part of China any more than it makes the USA part of Britain. As a matter of fact, there's a problem of racism against mainlander Chinese, since locals tend not to see them as true Singaporeans. This is exacerbated by the fact that lots of mainlander Chinese are pretty pro-China, human rights violations and all, while the local Chinese don't like China and the CCP very much. We're closer culturally to Taiwan. Second, it's not illegal to be undressed inside your own home. You can be stalkers while bathing or doing the deed if you like. You just can't use "I am in my own home" as a defense against streaking or showing everyone your naughty bits. 90% of the population live in government apartments, and we don't need pervs flashing people through their windows. Incidentally, this is a law come about because people were doing that. Singapore used to have a big flasher problem back in the 80s. Times were just weird. 3. It's not illegal to chew gum, only to import or sell it or bring it onto the trains. This is because idiots used to literally gum up the train doors and make everyone late for work. The government put up with it for a few months and then said, screw it, no more gum for anyone. This is why we can't have nice things. And finally, the government doesn't fine people for every little offense anymore. They used to, but enforcement has become lenient in the last 2 decades. Sadly, this means that there's now a ton of litter where the streets used to be pristine. Still, you might not want to litter or spit right in front of a cop. That Africa is a country and that it's comprised of only one ethnicity. That it's socially acceptable to call people the C word. You'll get away with it with your mates, but you'll probably get your head stomped if you call the wrong person that in public. Also, it's possible to be arrested for using it in public in certain circumstances. Oh, and I hate that people think we all knew Steve Irwin. Like, sure thing, we've all shared many a bush-chuck tinnies with old mate Steve-O down the local. Not all of us say, eh?
Wait, I'm confused. Are you Canadian or Kiwi?
Somehow people think that Brazilians speak Spanish and only like soccer and carnival. The soccer and carnival thing is mostly true, but Spanish? Really?
Most people can't tell Portuguese and Spanish apart, so there's that. Pair that up with only having a vague idea of what European country invaded what plot of land back in the day, and you've got a reason for the confusion.
That we're all tech scammers and like eating cow dung. If your guess was India, congratulations, you've been influenced by the stereotype. That the Netherlands is called Holland, but Holland is only a piece of the Netherlands. Also that apparently we're the inventor of the tulip, that was Turkey. We aren't all overweight people wearing old Navy American flag t-shirts and khaki shorts. Only like 60% of us. That and all Americans own firearms. The majority of Americans don't even live in an armed household. There are more than 2 accents in the UK. It's not just Cockney and the Queen's English. That everyone in Japan works crazy hours and never has enough time or energy for things they want to do. People on average work longer hours than mainland Europe, sure. But they work less hours than the US, so that's BS. In France, everyone believes the opposite, that we do the bare minimum and are on vacation all the time. Yep, that's not true. My dad's a university professor and he works a lot, while my mum works in tech and it seems to be even worse there. That Sweden is a socialist paradise. It's neither socialist nor a paradise, though it is a nice country to live in, except for the weather. That we ride camels to work in Turkey. Short answer, we don't. That in Brazil you can get robbed at gunpoint virtually everywhere you go and… oh wait, that's true. That Germans all wear lederhosen. Except on the Oktoberfest or the Wazen, it's a rare sight. That we're hungry. Alright, it looks like I should have specified that I am talking about the country of Hungary. That we here in Hong Kong have basic human rights.
So many people think that the drop bear isn't real. It is. You've got to be real careful because they're real sneaky and they'll screw you up.
There is no freaking cream in carbonara. Regardless of the borderline relevance and hilarious Italian culinary outrage, this is true, and the actual real recipe, using tempered eggs, is way tastier and cheaper anyway. Try it out, folks. The whole world seems to think that Germany is a place run by very smart, efficient, and hardworking people. The truth is that there are little to no relevant innovations coming from here. We've missed the jump into the new era because of stubborn and conservative structures and ideas. The once high-quality label "Made in Germany" isn't worth a damn anymore. It might still be better than some cheap crap from other countries, but it is still built to break. That all Australians drink Foster's beer. On the contrary, it's one of the least sold beers here, and it tastes horrible. That we all have the same accent or sound the same way when we speak. People watch a lot of British TV and assume we all speak in RP or like Londoners, when there's a pretty broad range of accents here in the UK. Like Northern or Midlands accents are wildly different to the ones in the South, and don't even get me started on Welsh, Scottish or Irish accents. That we're the freest country in the world. With a caveat, only people within the US actually believe that. Those on the outside, not so much. That all Alaskans live in igloos and ride polar bears. The image most people outside of Europe have of Austria. Did you really think that we're always wearing lederhosen and drindel? That we're all living in the Alps and that we yodel from one mountain hill to another to stay in touch with our neighbors? Actually, that would be pretty great, to be honest. I'm English, but I still haven't met the Queen, and I don't like tea. Many people still believe chewing gum is banned in Singapore, and if you're caught with it, you'd get caned. The reality is that in the 1990s it used to be completely banned, but today only selling it is illegal. Dental chewing gum is also allowed in Singapore. American here. Not all Americans are loud, obnoxious, stupid, gun-toting rednecks. There are many smart, polite Americans. We just get outshined by the idiots. Oh, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of idiots, but we're not all idiots. That Greeks are lazy and don't work. Say that to me while I'm working my usual 12-hour day, can't see my friends because they do the same, and my father is dying because he overworked himself and has very serious health problems because of it. Bad teeth in the UK, when in reality, up to the age of 18, we have free dental care. Brazil is a horrible place with criminality rates at 63,917%, and we live in a forest. That it's easy to start your own business and grow it until you achieve the American dream. By the 5th year of being open, 50% of them fail, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I live in Norway. There's supposed to be a misconception that everyone native to Norway is tall and blonde. My ancestors have lived here for ages, and 90% of my family look like dark-haired hobbits. I've also heard that many people think that the Norwegian language can be traced directly back to the Norse language. There are bound to be relations between them, but it's mostly a mix between Danish and German. And during the last 30 years, more and more English has found its way into it. The Northern Lights are a very rare sight in most parts of the country. I live relatively far south and have seen them here once, but they usually only appear in the north during winter. Our country isn't very big, but it is quite long. The furthest northmost point of the country is over 1,900 kilometers, or 1,200 miles away from my house. If I were to travel the same distance southwards, I'd reach Trento in northern Italy. I think that myth about Polish people being thieves and alcoholics is still commonly believed. Of course we drink a lot, but not every single one is an alcoholic. And that myth about us being thieves is not correct. I lived in Poland my whole life, I'm 30, and I've never been robbed or anything like that. I never lock my car, and I park on the street. Poland is really nice, and when this freaking pandemic ends, I highly recommend that everyone should consider visiting us. That Canadians are inherently nice and tolerant. We are not. So many rude, ignorant jerks. When did you get to watch a dumb criminal set themselves up for failure? Someone stole my credit card and bought an iPad, but had it shipped to my house. I'm guessing they accidentally went with the default ship to billing address option. The kicker is they actually called me, pretending to be a Best Buy employee, and said they'd shipped a package in error and I should leave it outside for UPS to pick up. Luckily, I noticed the charge on my credit card and was able to return the iPad for a full refund. I gave the phone number to the cops. A friend of mine had his backpack with his $1,400 engineering laptop in it stolen while at campus food court. I had a weird gut feeling it would turn up on Craigslist or somewhere similar. Every day for a week I checked Craigslist. Exactly 1 week later, I found that laptop. This extremely stupid criminal took a picture of the laptop screen with my friend's login name. Yeah, very dumb criminal. So I contacted the seller immediately via email and he responded within 20 minutes. I said I'd like to buy the laptop from him. We agreed to meet at a nearby parking lot later that day. Next, we called the cops. They agreed to set up a sting on the thief. One of the officers pretended to be the buyer and approached the thief. The officer acted as if he was examining the laptop, but was actually looking for the serial number. Boom, it had a matching number and they arrested that idiot. A week ago, 4 months later, the guy was proven guilty and, to my knowledge, was spending a year in prison. Plus, my buddy finally got his laptop back. My parents were driving home and saw their second car coming the other way. They turned around, followed it, and stole it back with their spare keys. And yes, they obviously reported the matter to the police. The stupid girl found my debit card after I'd dropped it on campus, took it to Wilson's Leather and bought her boyfriend a leather jacket. When my card didn't have enough on it to pay the whole cost of the jacket, she used her own debit card to finish paying it off. All on video. We left our garage open a few years ago at night by accident. Apparently someone had been snooping around in there because everything was out of place in the morning, except for a solid gold bracelet lying on the ground outside the garage door. What did they steal? My fricking Razor scooter, man. My card was stolen once. The person ordered about $75 worth of pizza and had it delivered to their house. I visited the pizza place, said I needed a receipt for the pizza so my company would pay me back, and they gave me a receipt showing the address they delivered it to. Turned it into the police in town and they were on the news 2 days later. Seems like a bit of a misjudgment to get it delivered rather than just coming and picking it up in the store. I mean, you might have ended up in the CCTV, but what are the odds of anyone being able to identify you with that? When I worked at Guitar Center, a couple came into the store. The guy left and the girl stayed, checking out the guitars. A sales guy saw her holding 2 higher-end Gibson Les Pauls down by the low-end side of the wall by the BC Riches. He asked if he could help, and she asked a question about the guitars. He took one from her and went to check something on it, and once he was about 20 yards away, she bolted. She sprinted down the hallway to the warehouse, past the bathrooms, and busted out the emergency exit door that lets out behind the store. 2 guys took chase and made it out in time to see a car squealing around the corner of the building. We had really got nothing to go on. I was mad because having a $3,500 guitar stolen cuts into my bonus, and it just overall sucks to have your crew bummed about the theft. Cut to 1 week later, I'm running my morning meeting and I'm told I have an important phone call. I take the call and my friend is telling me I have to check my email. I do, and there's a link from him to a Craigslist ad. The mother effer posted a photo of himself holding the guitar. I know that it's ours, I just know it. He describes it inaccurately and is asking for $1,000. Gives a BS reason for it not having a case. We need that serial number. We need that fricking number. Another manager calls him pretending to be a collector. He casually asks for the serial number, saying he's only looking for guitars from a certain year. He calls it a date code, but I don't think the guy is buying it. He tells him he'll call him back with the number, but then never does. So we're getting antsy. We call the cops, we form a plan. Another one of our guys calls and tells this dude he just has to have this guitar. He'll come meet him with cash. The guy agrees. They meet at a gas station. Dude walks up with this gorgeous $3,500 Les Paul in a $35 gig bag. They talk crap for a bit and my guy asks to see the guitar. He looks it over and checks the serial. It's ours. Yeah, man, this is exactly what I was hoping for. Great guitar. And then he waves across the street to the cop car that was waiting around the corner. The guy is like a deer in the headlights. They arrest him and even let us leave with the guitar. Back at the store, my friend's phone rings. It's the guy's number. He answers and a woman's voice says, "Were you meeting my boyfriend about a guitar?" My friend says, "Yep, sure did." "Oh, he's not back yet. Are you still with him?" "Nope, I'm already home." "Oh, weird. Okay. Well, did you get the guitar?" "I sure did. I'm holding it right now. Thanks." "Oh, great. Thanks. Have a good day." 1 hour later, she calls back. Didn't even bother to answer. She left a very nasty voicemail with a lot of swearing. Priceless. I hear he threw her under the bus in court, and they were both in hot crap over the whole thing. Jeez, the girl felt justified enough about her actions to leave an angry voicemail? What the hell could she possibly say? I've got one from this past weekend, actually. I volunteer cleaning up at a local park. It's called a park, but it has no facilities and no employees. It's really more of a forest, and it doesn't get much official attention. Anyway, almost every day I walk through, pick up trash, and ensure it's properly disposed of. It's a beautiful park, and I like to keep it that way. So Sunday afternoon, I found that someone had dumped a huge amount of construction debris in the park along one of the access roads. As I piled it up neatly, I found a receipt with the guy's name, address, and phone number, along with a description of his vehicle, including the make, model, mileage, and VIN. So I called the state park police and asked to speak with an officer. I showed him the dumped trash, showed him the receipt I found, and made a formal complaint. He gave me the usual, "We'll let you know if we need anything else from you." The officer then called me last night to thank me for finding the receipt. He said they went and paid the guy a visit, found that vehicle in the driveway, and he answered the door. "Are you John Doe?" He said, "Yeah, that's me." And the officer said he insisted he knew nothing about illegal dumping, no surprises there, and when it seemed like the interrogation was going nowhere, he pulled out the receipt and the guy said, "That's not my name." He had already said it was him. The officer told me that's when he said, "Okay, sir, if you're not going to properly identify yourself, you're under arrest for obstructing a government official, a Class A misdemeanor, and we'll fingerprint you at the station and find out who you really are." Suddenly, the guy's story changed. He was the guy on the receipt, that was his truck, and he dumped the trash in the park. The officer even said that the guy said, "I never thought I'd get caught," and he wouldn't have either if it wasn't for us meddling kids. In short, guy dumps construction debris in a park, leaves receipt with name, address, phone number, make and model and mileage of vehicle, and VIN. The guy lies about it when questioned by the cops, and comes clean after confronted with the receipt. I've had this same thing happen about 8 years ago. The idiots used my debit card info to purchase a digital camera and computer parts, about $800 total, from Newegg, and then had them shipped to my address. Called up Wells Fargo as soon as I noticed the charge, and they handled it fairly quickly. 3 days later, I was refunded the purchase and returned the merchandise to Newegg as soon as it arrived. I considered myself pretty lucky that the miscreants used incredibly poor thievery technique. My soccer team was playing a game at a local park. During the game, a sketchy-looking guy runs through to the pitch we're playing on holding several cell phones. We soon realize that said valuables belong to us and we begin chasing him. He probably thought that he's made a profit, stealing cell phones worth hundreds, until he looks back and sees 30 people chasing him down. When we caught him, we took our valuables back and proceeded to beat the crap out of him. The thing is, our changing rooms are roughly 200 yards from the field, so why run directly past the people you've just robbed when you could so easily sneak away? Someone stole my wife's debit card and used it for online gambling websites in Europe, and ended up winning. The winning automatically went right back into her account. Sadly, she couldn't keep it since she had already disputed the charges with the bank and frozen the account. Damn it. I mean, you'd almost be kicking yourself for doing the smart thing and freezing your account, wouldn't you? That said, you potentially recouped a lot of money for other stuff they'd spent it on, so it's probably just best to take the low-level win. The first time my dad was on jury service, the case involved a criminal who had tried to rob a jeweler's shop. This was probably in the UK in the early 50s, when police response was slower and shops weren't as well protected as they are now. The shop had a burglar alarm, but the thief figured that he could just smash the front window, grab anything he could reach, and be gone long before the police showed up. Unfortunately, he didn't do his research properly. The shop was actually on the ground floor of an apartment block that was used to provide accommodation for young police officers. About a minute after the alarm went off, he found himself surrounded by 20 cops, and about 15 minutes after that, he was in a cell. In short, clueless burglar knocks over a shop next to police apartments, and jail time ensues. A friend of mine was mugged by some teenagers. He wore a fluffy jacket, so when the muggers frisked him, they didn't find his mobile phone, but got his cash. As they were leaving, he heard them say that they were taking a taxi to a specific store. As soon as they left, it was easy for him to call the police, who made a broadcast to all taxi drivers. After that, it was easy for the police to arrest the muggers. I live in a third world country, and my parents got a phone call from someone who first put a crying girl on the line and claimed they'd kidnapped me. I was with them at the time, so they knew it was fake. The conversation went like this. "Oh, that's weird. I don't have a daughter." "Oh, you don't? So do you have a son?" "Nope." "Oh, well, how about a younger sister?" And my dad hung up. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. That happened to my mother. Somehow, someone got a hold of her credit card number and proceeded to buy things. Not even things that were remotely close to what she likes. I think they brought an attachment to a muffler, a prepaid cell phone, and some CDs, all shipped to my mother. I don't think they were very good at crime. My friend's roommate also lifted my debit card to buy lunch and dinner on a couple of occasions. He works in an entirely different part of the state than my friend. My friend confronted him about it, and he said, "No, that wasn't me." My friend just asked him again, and he admitted it. Still waiting on getting paid back, though. In high school, a girl's BlackBerry got stolen while she was at track practice. It was a huge scandal, as the only people with access to her stuff were people on the track team. The person who stole her phone tried to set up his email on the phone, which sent an email to her saying, "Are you sure you want to change your email to theguy'sname@gmail.com? It ended up being a team captain who had given the speech to the team asking for the phone to be returned. NBA player Reggie Harding washed out of the league by age 25. He returned to his old neighborhood in Detroit without any marketable skills. One day, he walked into a neighborhood liquor store with a nylon mask over his head, brandishing a weapon and demanding money. The clerk took one look at the 7-footer and reportedly said, "I know that's you, Reggie," to which Harding replied, "It ain't me, man." When I was 16 years old, some former friends broke into my basement. Among a couple of other random things, they stole my radio, which was a giant boombox, and my bike. They also stole a couple of sports collectibles that belonged to my stepfather. My stepfather was not the kind of man you wanted to get mad. While he was never a violent person, he had no problems with resorting to violence if need be. His sons, though, had hair-trigger tempers. It didn't take too much for them to want to beat the crap out of someone. I was angry, my stepfather was about to lose his crap, he calls up his sons who head over to the house. As they're about to pull in, they hear music. The kids who broke into my house were in the schoolyard, 3 houses down from where I live, listening to my radio, and one is sitting on my bike. Beatings were issued. Some buddies of mine once broke into an ice cream truck and got busted just a few blocks away eating said ice cream. I had my iPod Touch stolen. The guy didn't seem clever when he started talking with his girlfriend on my Facebook. Figured who she was, talked with her, got her to talk with him, he lived far away apparently, and boom. This kid that was in my class in high school years back ran an operation on eBay selling those underbody neon light kits. You know, the bullcrap that makes you look all fast and furious. Anyway, he makes a small fortune selling that stuff. The only problem was that when the customer received their product, it was just a picture of the neon car kit. This kid had apparently worded his description to confuse people into thinking they were buying the real thing, but in reality they were spending $200 on a piece of paper. A bunch of really angry people from around the country called our local police and he ended up getting arrested. I can't remember the charge, but he had tens of thousands of dollars to pay back plus fines. The entire town shamed him, made fun of him for crying when the police interviewed him and everything. He was all over the news for a bit. You know, it's a pretty small town if this was the news event of the century there. Also, the narrator thought about doing something like this to try and scam the scalpers who were taking advantage of people when the PS4 came out, and people were buying them out and selling them at inflated prices on eBay to desperate parents at Christmas. My friend informed me that I could still get in a lot of trouble no matter how explicit my ads for pictures of PS4s were, even if I made sure I was only selling to scalpers. So it just goes to show you can't even get away with doing this kind of thing to rob from the bad guys. This is my story of how Visa paid me for a diamond ring. One day I went to check my credit card bill and noticed there were 2 really big charges, one at a random jewelry store in Seattle and one at jcpenney.com. This was back in 2003 before they'd call you instantly. I called them and they said they'd take care of it. The charges were removed immediately, and I thought I was done with the whole thing. My wife's family lives out of the country and we go to visit them every year for Christmas. Everyone just buys stuff and ships it to us in the months before, so we get random packages all the time. A day or two later, my wife, then girlfriend, calls me at school and says, did you order a 3-diamond engagement ring? Now, she knows it's not for her because she hates diamonds. We quickly figure out this must be the $2,000 charge on my credit card bill. It seems they had the item shipped overnight, no idea why they sent it to my address. Maybe they were hoping to pick it up in the mail. It's almost time to fly out of the country, so we stash it in my desk and figure we'll deal with it when we get back. 3 weeks later, when everything's settled down, I call JCPenney and explain the situation. I'm very clear. I have the ring, I didn't pay a dime for it, and I'd be happy to get it back to them if they send me a shipping box. They offer to send me a prepaid thing so I can return it. A couple of days later, it arrives, but it's only a shipping label, and I don't have the original box. I don't want to be responsible for the item getting damaged in shipping, so I call JCPenney and explain the whole thing again. They say I should just bring the label and the ring to the local JCPenney and they'll take care of it. So, we hop in the car and go to the local store. Here's the flow of events. The service desk won't help us. Anything jewelry must be handled by that department. The jewelry department looks up the order and finds that it's a special order, and only the special order department can do anything about it. And there just happens to be a special order counter downstairs. So we end up at the special order counter and I explain the whole thing to the guy behind the desk. He gets his manager and I explain it again. I'm very clear that this is not my ring and I have not paid for it. The guy at the register, with his manager standing behind him, tells me that the only way he can ship the ring back is as a return, and he has to put the full amount back on the original card. His books need to match the ins and outs, so that's his only option. I ask if they're going to be mad that they paid me for the ring, and he says, if they come after anyone, it's going to be me. Okay then, I say as I hand him my credit card, and he puts $2,000 on it. I figure in a week or two, JCPenney will call and get their money back. The call never comes. Not in 3 weeks or 3 months. A year later, the credit card company gets tired of me having such a large positive balance and mails me a check for $2,000. In short, Crook buys a ring with my card, and JCPenney pays me $2,000. My dad is an ex-cop. He still knows and hangs out with most cops in town. After he retired, he bought a very large Ford pickup truck. Sorry, I don't know anything about the model. And he had a custom paint job done to it. Everybody knew this truck. Of course, some idiot steals it. Bad enough that he stole a truck with a custom paint job which is going to stick out like a sore thumb no matter where it goes, but this moron decides to take it joyriding around town. Of course, once the cops get wind of this, they're all over it like flies on poop. Word spreads quickly. If anyone sees JJ's truck, it was stolen. Get them. It's not like they had to look very hard. There were eagles painted on the back windows, each door, and the hood. It's not like the truck was going to blend in with the rest of traffic, especially considering the owner is well known. The guy might as well have had a neon sign saying "Please arrest me" floating over his head. He was busted the minute he drove by a cop, which didn't take very long. A guy I know stole my bike once. 2 weeks later, however, he forgot who he stole it from and bragged to me and several other people about how he stole it. So I stole it back. I saw a guy get caught for stealing a bunch of Nutter Butters once. What do you mean by a bunch? Was he stealing multiple packages of Nutter Butters, or did he just grab a handful of loose Nutter Butters and run? I'm going to go buy some Nutter Butters now. Nice work, Nutter Butter PR rep. Amex is a little overzealous in their anti-fraud practices. I just purchased $1,200 of parts for my home computer rig from Newegg.com. I got a call about 30 minutes later from Amex asking if it was me. I said, yes, what kind of thief would send computer parts to the billing address? His response was, you'd be surprised. And some of these other answers are making me realize they were far from exaggerating. Someone got a credit card in my name, made purchases, but paid the balance on time. Did you thank him for the good credit rating? In principle, no, but in practicality, I probably should have. I remember reading about someone on here finding that someone stole their identity and opened up several cards in their name when he was very young. They always paid on time and made his credit score great. I wish I could remember what the end result was, if they were already paid off, if he had to close it and pay the remaining balance himself or things like that. Haha, I love this. Were people just unable to get one in their own name? Had they learned from their previous terrible credit score and resolved to do better? So many questions about what's going on here. I used to live in a student rental. Me, a friend, and a third guy whom neither of us knew. My friend and I went to Newcastle for a weekend on a visit, and when we returned, both my Xbox 360 and his PS3 were missing. We quizzed guy number 3 about it, and he claimed that he'd gone out one night and the door was open when he came back. He said he hadn't contacted us as his phone was broken. That turned out to be a total lie. So naturally, we contacted the police, and the officer who came round inspected the door and mentioned that there was no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house. A couple of days later, flatmate number 3 left his door open while he went out. Neither of us totally believed his story, so we decided to poke our heads into the room to see if there was anything untoward. And what do we find? Yep, both consoles plugged into his TV. We left the room and didn't mention it to him when he came back. Instead, my friend went outside and contacted the police to inform them that we'd found the perpetrator. About an hour later, he was being led out the door in handcuffs. 2 hours later, his entire room was emptied out and in a pile of black sacks in the hallway. We work damn fast when we want to. His father came by the next day to collect the stuff and to verbally attack us for grassing, and we never heard from him again. To this day, we still laugh about the sheer audacity of stealing from someone you live with and keeping the stolen items roughly 20 feet away. When did you see the opening of a Pandora's box of gross or crazy stuff at a hotel? I wasn't working and was just a guest, but I wish I'd asked the staff for the backstory. I was checking into my hotel in LA and was given my keycard. Headed to the room, opened the door, and there was just this undressed buff dude standing next to the bed staring at me. He says nothing. I apologize and quickly leave, assuming somehow I'd gotten the wrong room. I go back to the front desk and say, "I'm sorry, but I think you gave me the wrong room. There's a buck man already in there." The worker at the front desk says, "Crap, not again." He pulls out his walkie-talkie and says, "Security, he's back again." They assigned me to a different room and I was on my way. I work overnights in a relatively small hotel and at least 6 or 7 days a week. I hear people doing the deed loudly as heck in their rooms. Half the rooms have a balcony that overlooks the lobby and those doors are not soundproof at all. We had a man sleepwalk out of his room to the lobby completely undressed. We had another lady show up to the lobby in her undies. Her boyfriend had choked her out and stolen her wallet with the room keys. I worked at a hotel in a resort town in Europe. One of the maids called me to a room for help because it was in the location of an extremely messy bout of group whoopee from the touring ice show. The room was covered in bodily secretions and excreta. There were used rubbers thrown everywhere and half the furniture was busted. The poor maid was in tears, thinking she'd have to clean it. The hotel management called in a professional cleaning company who wore disposable suits, respirators, and eye protection. They got rid of most of the stuff in the room and charged a fortune to the ice show. Had a teen girl exposed from the waist down, speed-walking around the hotel and casino looking for her mum. She was absolutely hammered and in a full blackout. Me and another supervisor caught up to her just as she was getting into an elevator full of drunk dudes telling her they'd help her find her mum. Her mum was not at the casino and we never determined where she actually came from. She just appeared there, moving like a speedwalker, undressed except for a tank top. I work front desk at a luxury hotel. One night, the elevator door opened and a completely undressed woman stumbled out, covered in blood. It turned out she was epileptic and had had a seizure in the shower. She had fallen, grazed herself, exited her room and locked herself out. It was a truly terrifying 25 minutes of trying to piece together what had happened. As someone with seizures, this is my worst fear, man. Although I don't want to minimize the fact that people with any level of epilepsy have it way harder than me, I'd just like to posit that I feel like I'm capable of having this level of accident without seizures and just by dint of being clumsy. Thank you for your time. I was a night auditor at Home 2 Suites several years back. Our usual extended stay clientele were traveling nurses, government contractors, or out-of-town veterans getting something done at the VA hospital. But we had one guy and girl on the first floor for a few weeks that were odd. It took us a while to realize that it was a working girl and her pimp. Some John would come to see her, and the guy who rented the room would come and hang out in the lobby or go smoke at our fire pit. Our manager was a bit clueless and took longer to figure it out, but once she did, she went and knocked on the door to ask them to leave. The guy only cracked the door so she couldn't see inside the room. He had declined housekeeping for 2 weeks straight, but she managed to see an office chair behind him that had 2 firearms and a huge Rambo knife on it. So she called the cops. I came up later that day to pick up my check to find cops surrounding the building. Turns out he'd barricaded himself in the room and held the girl hostage, so SWAT had to come tear gas him through the window and use a battering ram to get inside. The owners fired our manager for that, for letting it go on so long, and for the optics of cops swarming our hotel. I was night shift security for a motel right next to the biggest casino in my state. It was common for substance addicts to hang out around the property. One time, this guy staying in a room did a little too much crystal and had a freak out. He was running around the walkways undressed. I had to ward him away from people's rooms so they wouldn't be disturbed. He ended up jumping off the second-story balcony and splatting on the pavement. He scampered up and raced across the street into a car dealership. Not my problem anymore. Many years ago, I worked at a very nice casino resort as a valet. A regular pulled up in his nice BMW and I went to help him. I wrote up his ticket, got his keys, and offered to help load up his luggage on a bell cart while we waited for a bellman. Opened the truck and went to lift the suitcase and I just about threw my back out. I was not prepared for it to be so heavy. I gave it another go and heaved it onto the bell cart, and I heard a sound. "Mr. Smith, did your suitcase just make an oof sound?" Long story short, a working girl who was banned from the property was stowed away in there to get back up to his room. The crazy crap that people pull on the regular to get blacklisted buddies, or blacklisted working girls, into their rooms, and that was just working in my hometown motel? Jesus! It was like some sort of video game nightmare of Spot the Impersonator. I had to know just who everyone was and all their potential relations too. Who was friends that week, and who was on the outs with each other. who was dating who in the townie circle that week. 2 cousins parking their vehicles weirdly close to each other? Nope. Looks like one's back to dating the crazy pyro girl who lives under the interstate. She's definitely sneaking into the first floor room at that moment. The whole swapped ID with a similar looking person and a hoodie trick, looking at the floor and waiting till a new hire was on duty to walk in. I've seen a legit full-on wig once. When an acquaintance of a blacklist checked in, next thing you know there's a blurred streak making mad dashes from a car to a room. That was always peak trouble, that signal. I'm working night shift as a receptionist and I had my fair share of questionable encounters. One night a guy comes from outside and asked if he could use our restroom. It's located 1 floor down. Every time we let someone in at night, we kind of scan the person before letting them in, and I didn't get any crazy vibes from that dude. After about 20 to 25 minutes, I got the feeling maybe everything wasn't okay and I went downstairs. When approaching the bathrooms, I could hear him inside the handicap toilets, and the door was open a bit. He was on his knees with his pants down, cranking and choking on the door handle while watching smut on his phone. I yelled at him and asked what the heck he was doing, but didn't want to lay hands on him, so I grabbed a towel and threw it over his face to break line of sight. I told him to leave immediately or I'd call the cops. I went upstairs and after a few minutes, he left the building. That one sticks out for me. Not witnessed, but I saw a portion on camera. A guest was walking the halls with a machete. He proceeded to go into his room. A few minutes later, the guest next door can be seen pounding on his door. The previous night, that guy had attacked the woman he was staying there with. I'm assuming they thought he was attacking her again. The neighbors started to head back to their room when the guest throws the woman out of the room, with her arm barely attached, spraying blood all over the walls and floor. He doesn't notice the door shut behind him and he takes off running. He was caught very quickly in a parking lot next door. That room was something I'll never forget. Blood and flesh on the bed and floor. The boss said to tell housekeeping to clean it up. I quit a few days later. Worked at AITA in Toronto. Management sent me up to a room that they knew for a fact contained a pimp. Big fur coat, grills, giant chains, and of course, his employees. They didn't warn me of this beforehand. If they did, I wouldn't have gone alone. The guy's employees were both undressed from the waist up and apparently celebrating a birthday, and tried very hard to get me to join in. I just needed them to not get another noise complaint because I did not want to have to evict them. Night auditor here, I've seen a lot. Multiple times I've had guests come to my desk completely undressed because somehow they locked themselves out. Again, undressed. This one always confuses me. And probably the most not safe for work one was a guest who'd gotten violently ill. We're talking projectile throw up on every surface of the room, blood all over, poop, pee, everything was just destroyed. Obvious call to paramedics, but I can never unsee that. I did security for a hotel for a number of years. I've seen au naturel guests locked out of their rooms, wedding parties break into the pool area and jump in fully clothed, and had a drunk woman climb out of her 3rd floor window and chill on the roof just below. The worst was when someone drowned in the lake beside the hotel and they hadn't found the body yet. Doing night rounds sucked because I was afraid I'd find the body. I think this story fits the bill for what you're asking. I was a pizza delivery boy. There was a Fleabag motel in our town and we get a call for pizza delivery. I get the order, I drive it over and knock on the room door. Guy answers the door wearing only a towel and I glance right past him and there's a beautiful, even more undressed woman laying on the bed on full display. She notices me looking, I'm sure, and just says, "How you doing, baby?" Not baby in like the way you'd call a lover, or like she was flirting, but more in a motherly way. I looked up at the dude after that and he just gave me a look like, "That's right, I just got done hitting that." Man, feels like he set this whole thing up as much for the little self-esteem boost of someone else just seeing him like this, as much as for the actual sensations of hiring her or for the taste of pizza. Just get normal hobbies, my dude. This one time staying at a hotel, and just outside my room, like 2 doors, someone passed out drunk and crapped himself. The liquid kind, in a huge pool, at least 2 meters in diameter. The hotel changed everyone on the floor to other rooms in other floors. When I was young and worked at a hotel, I was delivering a room service meal, and when I got there, the door was closed, but had just been left shy of being latched. I knocked and the guest yelled, "Come in!" I pushed it open with the cart, walked in, and he was standing there with a big grin on his face, watching my reaction as I wheeled in the cart. He was undressed, as was a woman who was on her knees in front of him, vigorously working. She never stopped or even did a sideways glance in my direction. He smiled and reached out and handed me a 20 he had in his hand and said to just leave it there and close the door on my way out. I guess part of the whole deal was to show off and see my reaction. I was shocked but never said anything to anyone at work. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I work at the front desk of a large convention hotel, one of the big brands. The lobby bar was right across the lobby from the front desk. One night as I was working the desk, checking someone into their room, these two drunk guys in the bar got into a fight. They were really going at it, beating the crap out of each other, and they spilled out into the lobby. One guy picks up a bar stool and, just like in the movies, he crashed it down on the other guy's head. But unlike in the movies, the bar stool didn't splinter into pieces. It was solid wood and he bashed the other guy hard. Other guy went down like a sack of potatoes, out cold and bleeding all over the place from a large head wound. I got to sit and watch as the cops and paramedics came, arrested them both and patched up the one guy's busted head. Meanwhile, I still had guests checking in, wondering what kind of hotel they had booked. I saw someone mop without putting out the sign. Definitely not safe for work. Well, let's see. One time, this guy left his recently used male adult toy in the room he was in. Hint, it's one letter away from flashlight. Never heard from him again. This other time, someone left a hardcore cartoon tentacle magazine in the room hidden under a cabinet. Then there was this other time a guy was smoking green herb in his room, and when I knocked on his door due to a complaint, the guy offered me a doobie. And yes, I took it. Got to deal with the crap I saw there somehow. I work in the back of the house at a major Las Vegas resort. When we first opened, management made every effort to conceal anything negative that might have occurred from the guests staying at the resort. One day on the receiving dock, an ambulance crew comes through pushing an empty gurney. About 30 minutes later, they came back with a body completely under the sheet. Someone had clearly passed away. The not-so-safe-for-work moment came when we realized that this obvious man's corpse had a protruding appendage coming from his groin, tenting the sheet. It was rumored that what had done him in was taking too much white snow and performance-enhancing bedroom meds, and he had died in the act. I used to work third shift at a hotel while going to university. One weekend every summer, our city hosted a tournament for the National Softball Association for the Deaf. One night I got multiple noise complaints and went upstairs. In one of the rooms, a man and a woman were having the loudest, most bestial whoopee you could possibly imagine. You could hear it from 30 meters down the hall. They weren't answering the phone and obviously couldn't hear me knocking. I used a master key to crack open the door, and there was even more amazement at the pure volume and completely atonal and unabashed moans, grunts, and yowls. Being careful not to stick my head in, I reached inside the room and flipped the lights on and off and then pretty much ran away. It's a shame people complained because I hated to interrupt what must have been a good time. The most not safe for work thing that I recall was the manager getting on a cleaning kick and accidentally mixing the wrong chemicals in the pool area. A toxic gas started to form and the whole hotel had to be evacuated at like 5 a.m. Eastern Idaho, night audit and front desk. During a state-high school wrestling tournament, I heard a commotion in the sauna around 2 a.m. Grabbed the night audit baseball bat and went to see what was going on. Found 20 to 30 teenage boys either completely undressed or in their wrestling outfits, camping out in a sauna with room for 6. They were obviously trying to sweat down to make weight. A couple of months later, I heard a guy yelling from the closed indoor pool at around 4 a.m. He'd stuck his Johnson in a drain hole at the side of the pool, and it got stuck. I assessed he wasn't in immediate danger and called the fire department. He wasn't free when I left at 6. Oh, the wrestling tournament. At least in Iowa, it's the bane of all hospitality workers in the Des Moines area. Back in the 1980s, I worked with a woman who had previously worked at a Holiday Inn, and she told me about a young boy who had agreed to be stripped undressed, folded up into a rollaway, and his friends were going to roll it down the hall to the cheerleaders' rooms and sproing the bed open there. At least, that's what they told him. They actually took it into a very crowded lobby, popped the bed open, and ran off. I'm guessing a few people got in trouble for doing that. I had a woman tell me she was only into white guys, and it's too bad I'm not. I'm pretty dark-skinned Mexican, by the way. I didn't really acknowledge that she said that. Her husband said he needs to go talk to the front desk. 10 seconds later, she pulls up her dress and tells me to do her on the bar. She says it's a fantasy to get railed by a hotel or service worker. I ask her to please go away as 1, I'm not staff, I'm just sitting at the bar, and 2, my wife is next to me laughing at her airing her taco at the hotel bar. The bartender is mortified. The actual staff are apologizing. I ask for what because my wife is hysterically laughing and I'm not afraid of free-range women. Now my wife is dying laughing and we just showed up here for our honeymoon 30 minutes ago. Overall, good start to the week. I worked as a housekeeper in a hotel. I saw so many marital aids and butt toys just left in the room. I also had to clean off face and women's chest prints on the glass door to the balcony. Worked on a show at a Las Vegas casino. During the AVNs, the Adult Movie Awards show, a top actress came to our show with her boyfriend. The show was held up because she started lifting her shirt to show the audience her chest. Then she went south of the border on the boyfriend. As security finally arrived, they were full on doing the deed while sitting in the audience. He went to, quote, get drinks, ditching her. She bit a security guard in the arm so hard that she hit bone. Eventually, she was carried out and arrested. I'm sure the boyfriend was as well. Their awards show was the next day, but she missed it due to being in jail. This was a Cirque du Soleil show, definitely not the place for this behavior. Wow, you really made me go all out on censoring and selective word choice for that story. In my last comment, I mentioned I was a bit mystified by people really needing to display their reproductive activities. I did not think that the trend of that behavior would only grow from there. I used to work at a hotel. Thankfully, I never witnessed anything in person, but I was certainly privy to a lot more info than I ever cared to know. One day, a young man came in asking for a room. Sure, we have availability, and I went over rooms and pricing. He said, let me ask my chick. I didn't pay too much attention to his wording. A few minutes later, he came back and got registered in, and I thanked him and said I hoped him and his girlfriend had a nice stay, and let me know if there's anything else I can do for them. Nah man, she's not my girlfriend, he replied. I apologized again. I didn't pay too much attention to his wording earlier, so I simply said, sorry, I misunderstood. He replied, just because I nut her doesn't make her my girlfriend. But you know, I got to do something, right? I simply replied, sir, I hope you have a pleasant stay. I really didn't need to know all that. He certainly didn't need to tell me. I really didn't know how else to reply. But I'm probably safe in assuming that he and, well, it wasn't his girlfriend, but her, regardless of their relationship status, certainly did have a good night. Although again, I really didn't need to know that. Worked in a luxury hotel. Had a particular convention in town with guests who expected a lot of freebies because of who they were. Christian Men's Ministry Group. The leader was a smug jerk who convinced our room manager to give them the largest conference rooms for free so that their wives could spend the day doing Bible study. That afternoon, we had a father and his son tell us that they could hear a muffled scream coming from the room next to theirs, so he went up for a wellness check. Lo and behold, the religious ministries guy had called for a working girl who had bought her boyfriend. They tied him up in a sling hanging from the bathroom doorframe, gagged him, robbed him, and stuck a double-ended marital aid in his butt. So that's how we found him. It took multiple maintenance crews to be able to cut him down. He then tried to get us to comp more of their rooms because of our security failures, leading to his assault, battery, and robbery. One of our staff let slip to his wife, their bookkeeper, what actually happened, and his complaints magically went away. Best friend was the GM, I was the manager. He found over the years 4 firearms, 5 pounds of green herb at once, and 2 to 3 dead bodies. The amount of weapons is what surprises me. Only 1 out of the 4 guns found over the years was reported stolen. I worked housekeeping in a shady hotel in my local area. I say shady because it's a nicer hotel, but it's in a bad part of town and it attracts a lot of crazies. There was a man that used to tip the housekeepers in Mary J to clean his room. A large amount of green herb to the housekeepers in an illegal state and always wondered why. I finally got my turn to clean his room and I figured it out. There were adult toys everywhere. Everywhere. They were suction cupped to the headboards, shower, and toilet seat. There was loose glitter all over every inch of the room, as well as the balcony and fireplace. Used rubbers lined up like they were being counted before being thrown out on the table, and a seat at the end of the bed. He was always in the room while you cleaned, profusely apologized, and asked you not to say anything, and would just hand you an ounce just to throw out the trash, vacuum, and replace the towels and sheets. It was good stuff, so I understood why the other housekeepers never ratted him out. One night while I was working audit, I had some guests ask if there was any way to use the pool after hours. As our pool closed at 11 and they were checking in fairly close to midnight, I begrudgingly agreed as I had homework to do and I thought I'd be nice. So I agreed and let them in. My mistake was not turning on the lights, which I left off to not make other guests who might happen upon it think that it was open. So I let them in and proceeded to do my homework and ignored them. After a while, I decided to check the cameras to see if they were still in there or if they'd returned to their room. Upon looking at the cameras, I see them just going at it. At first, I didn't believe what I saw, but they were going to Pound Town. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to be that guy to ruin their good times, but I still had my job to worry about. Since the lights were off and it was just late, I let things finish off. I did get a nice tip from them as thanks for letting them, quote, use the pool after hours. That was the first and last time I let people in the pool area after hours. It was an interesting night for sure. What unhinged thing did you do as a kid that went down in history in your family? As a toddler, every time I got into an area that would echo even the slightest little bit, like hotels or large restaurants or malls, I would moo at the top of my lungs. I earned the unflattering nickname Meggy Moo Moo. As a toddler, I never crawled like other kids. I just kinda rolled around. I'd lay down on my stomach and just roll, man. When I was 3 or 4, my dad and I were in a barber shop. An elderly friend, a friend of the family, was waiting for a haircut and he and I were talking. I think I was sitting in his lap. He had a big nose with a wart on it. I suddenly said, "You've got a nose like a witch." My dad says he could have crawled under a chair, but the old man just laughed and said, "I guess I do, don't I?" I was at the pharmacy when my oldest, who was 3 at the time, saw an ancient old man walk by. Very loudly, he questioned, "Why does his face look like that?" It was very wrinkly and sunken in. The man got very close to my son's face and whispers, "This is what happens when you don't listen to your mommy." That right there is the kind of old man I want to be. So past giving a frick and ready to teach lessons through terrorizing the young. Back during the great cyanide and Tylenol scare back in 1982, my older brother took me trick-or-treating on Halloween. It went something like this. I shouted, "Trick or treat!" The neighbor gave me candy, and my brother tried to remind me to thank him. "Now, what do you say?" And I said, "It better not have any cyanide in it." When I was 3, I woke up early Christmas morning and opened all of the gifts under the tree. My parents kind of had to guess who got what because they were all jumbled together. At around 3 years old, I got curious about my dog's food, so I sat myself down in front of her food bowl and just started stuffing my face with it. After a few minutes, my mum, struggling to keep a straight face, asked me if I'd go with the rest of the family to get McDonald's or if I wanted to keep eating dog food. I looked at her, cheeks stuffed with dry dog food, and said, "Dog food." 18 years later, I still remember what dog food tastes like, and I still crave it occasionally, because life is just weird like that, even though I've never actually eaten it again, to clarify. I chewed on the drawstrings of my sweatpants and got them stuck between my teeth, so my pants were pulled up towards my face. I feel like there will be fewer people who didn't chew on their drawstrings as kids than people who did, but not so many of us successfully made semi-permanent suspenders with our faces, so well done there. My family has a habit of wrapping presents in other boxes. A gift card in an old TV box, clothes in a large shoebox, whatever random gift in whatever random box. I was also a very literal child who never even suspected that the people in my family are so full of malarkey. Cue little 5-year-old me opening up a present one Christmas, looking at my parents with disappointment written on my face, and with all the feigned politeness a 5-year-old can muster saying, "Oh, I guess I could learn to like Hot Pockets." I don't remember the incident. Nobody can remember what was in the Hot Pockets box, but it's referred to at every birthday and Christmas. When I was younger, my mum, my grandma, and I went to get some ice cream. Being the unattentive little 3-year-old that I was, I let the ice cream fall. My mum bought me another cone, handed it to me carefully, and said, "Keep an eye on your ice cream," and I did. I face-planted into the ice cream. When puberty reared its ugly head, I started calling those phone lines where you talk to women who'd describe doing the deed with you. First, just the 800 numbers. Those voices drove me crazy, but they always asked for credit cards, so I got bored quickly. Then I discovered 900 numbers. Stupid teenage me used a fake name, and just assumed that when they sent the bill, my parents should see the name of someone who didn't live there and toss the mail out. Little did I know it was being charged directly to our telephone bill. Fast forward to the next billing cycle and suddenly I'm being yelled at for like a $1,000 phone bill. Over the years, they typically like to bring it up in conversation when I'm introducing them to women that I'm seeing. It's been 20 years and they've never let me live it down. God damn, if my kids racked up a $1,000 phone bill, they're going to be doing chores till they're 40. Yes, it ended like that for me too. My brother did this exact thing in high school. We were poor and my single mother was furious. She yelled at us for hours and then sent us to bed. We shared a room. After a few minutes, she decided she wasn't done yelling and came back for more. I remember laying in a dark room with my mother standing in the doorway. Her last words were, "Do I need to stand here and talk dirty crap to you while you fall asleep?" I responded before my brother and said, "You'd better say no." My mother closed the door after that, and later she told me she was choking back laughter. Luckily, the phone company dropped the bill when she told them it was a minor who made the calls. I was around 11 years old and stayed home from school because I was sick. I'm admittedly a huge hypochondriac, so what better to do on my day off than to hop on WebMD and find out why I'm so sick? After 5 minutes of research, I'd pinned it down to one thing that it absolutely had to be: ovarian cancer. I called up my mum, who's a nurse, and told her the devastating news. I was met with hysterical laughter. There I am, sitting in my bed, heartbroken that my own mother is laughing at my inevitable demise. And that was the day that I found out that men don't get ovarian cancer. My brother and I once built a road for our toy cars out of sliced sausage and jam. Our neighbor across the street had a cat called Smuckers. Great cat. I was around 4 and still learning how to pronounce stuff. My older cousins on my dad's side found out about this cat, and every chance they got, they'd say, "Peeves, what's the kitty's name?" And I'd happily tell them the name, but I could never quite pronounce it right, and I'd replace the S and M with F. I'm 23, and some of them are married with children, but they still laugh at me about it. I needed a cup for baseball during elementary school, and the default one was too big and uncomfortable for my crotch. I proceeded to measure said region and report my findings to my mother so she could buy the appropriate-sized nut protector for me to wear while playing catch. I needed a cup for karate practice in 3rd grade. I was handed one by my instructor and told to change into it in the bathroom. I came out wearing it backwards, with the cup part on my butt. I guess I thought it was for emergency poops. I was playing around in our front yard when I was around 3 years old, while my parents were on the front porch reading the newspaper together. Off in the distance, they heard me say, "Here, kitty, kitty, such a pretty kitty." And at first they ignored me and just kept reading together. I guess thinking I was using my imagination or something. Eventually, my mum glanced over at me and immediately proceeded to scream. I quickly dropped the dead possum I was holding, covered in ants, and began crying because my mum had yelled at me. They got my eyes checked after that. There was nothing wrong with them, I was just a very confused 3-year-old. When I was learning to ride a bike, I insisted on only going downhill with the wind behind me. Now, if I do anything, my parents will say, "Make sure you're going downhill with the wind behind you." When I was young, like 2 or 3, I'd walk around the neighborhood and walk in the neighbor's house and sit at their kitchen table until they came in and gave me a pudding cup. They didn't eat them and would buy them exclusively for when I'd come over. Despite the breaking in, I still wouldn't help myself to the food until it was offered. How sweet! It reminds me of my grandpa when he came over on Sundays. We'd hug him and beg pennies from him. Yeah, I'm old. Pennies were worth something back then. Grandpa would hem and haw and reach into his pocket like, I don't know, I had to spend a lot of money last week. Then he divided the pennies in his change among the 3 of us. Later I learned he saved all the pennies he got all week just so he could go through his little ritual with us. He was a sweet man. My mother was driving somewhere with my little brother and I in the back seat. I was maybe 5, which would have made him around 3 or 4. We were chattering with each other and she had just kind of tuned us out to drive. At some point, she heard something, though, that made her tune back in. "Okay, hold real still." At that point, it dawned on her what we had been discussing. She swerved the car over to the side of the road, turned, and screamed, "No!" I had a hammer swung back, ready to knock all of my baby brother's teeth out as he eagerly bared them for me. My dad had left a hammer under the seat of the car, and I'd found it and somehow convinced my brother to let me knock out all of his teeth for the tooth fairy money so that we could be rich. This feels exactly like the kind of crap that my brother and I would get up to the second either of my parents turned their backs. Honestly, I think parenthood for them was more akin to being a lifeguard. They could not let their gaze down for a second. I was 4 when my parents suddenly heard me crying on the beach and running around spooked. I was screaming, "The beast! The beast! The beast!" again and again. Honestly, my parents thought I had a heat stroke until they saw a really tiny crab, a bit over an inch, that was chasing me. It was running, following me around, probably proud to be able to scare such a big monster. That was not my proudest moment. As to why I was followed by this crab, they have several theories. That the tiny crab was proud to be able to finally spook someone, that it fell in love with me despite it being a crab and me being a human, that it wasn't chasing me around but running with me, trying to escape Satan whose entrance I was actually announcing, and they also told me that around 6 years old I learned how to properly grab crab, and oh boy, the tables turned. I became some sort of terror, grabbing crabs before they tried to chase me around. My first experience with them apparently was the beginning of a long war. And did I manage to get rid of them? Yes and no. They got undercover agents. Both my best friend and my fiancé are cancer. Damn those crabs, always keeping an eye on me. Once when I was young, a business buddy of my dad visited our house. He told me my dad was his boss, so naturally I replied, "I'm the boss of my own poopy." I'm glad I don't remember who it was, but he no doubt remembers me. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I was a kid, I had one of those toy gavels that squeaked when you'd hit something with it. One day, when I was about 4 or 5, I ran into the living room when my mum had a bunch of family and neighbors over. I hit the table with this toy 3 times, squeak, 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 and said, "Order! Order in the court!" Everyone got silent and gave me their attention. I proudly proclaimed, "Peter Pan has a pee-pee," and promptly ran out of the room. Mum says the entire room was dying for a good 5 minutes. And yes, I used the medically correct YouTube unfriendly word for the male organ instead of pee-pee. I just learned the difference between boys and girls, so I wanted to flaunt my new knowledge and apply it to my favorite cartoon character. My mum was laughing too hard to talk to me about it, so I don't think I ever got a second talk of when to flaunt my knowledge. I lived in a very small town growing up, so my parents gave me a good amount of freedom at a young age. Everyone in the town knew everybody, and starting at around age 4 or 5, I'd ride my bike everywhere. Baseball park, candy store, town park, barbershop, those things. I particularly loved going to get my hair cut since the barbershop was a classic guy's guy place, where it was always the same 6 men working, 5 Italian guys from the same family and 1 Portuguese guy who was their friend. I'd just go in and sit down, and my dad would pay for it the next time he went in for a cut. For some reason, young me hated getting my hair cut by the Portuguese guy, Tony. I'm not sure if it was because he was rough with the clippers or if I just didn't think he was as funny as the rest of them. But whatever it was, I'd wait an extra 20 minutes to avoid him. This particular time I went in, Tony was hell-bent on getting me in his chair. He offered me candy, a free cut, even offered to sing to me, but none of his attempts caught my interest until he told me, "Vinny, sit down in the seat and tell me what you'd like. You sit in the seat and you're the boss." I clarify, "I sit in that seat and I become your boss?" "Yeah, you're the boss. Take a seat." "I'm the boss." "You the boss." "I'm the boss?" "You the boss." I hopped in the seat giddily. "All right, you're fired." And I jumped right back on out of his seat. The entire barbershop took a minute's pause for laughter, and poor Tony was standing there cursing in Portuguese, slapping his towel on the empty seat. My dad came in a week later, and reports were that there was another immediate burst of laughter when he walked in, and they were struggling to get the story out with all their chuckling. They didn't charge him for the cut I got that day. So my son was in the Cub Scouts and was eager to become a Boy Scout. So he'd come in all the time asking me what he needed to do to become a Boy Scout. One day, out of frustration, I told him the joke that I'd heard as a kid. How does a Cub Scout become a Boy Scout? Well, he eats his first brownie. For those of you who don't know, a brownie is pre-Girl Scouts, same idea as Cub Scouts. Well, that's the last I heard of it from him for a few weeks, and I forgot all about it. Then one night at a Cub Scouts meeting with several different troops present, the head person asked the crowd if anyone knew what they had to do to become a Boy Scout. Well, most of them have that deer stuck in headlights look going on, but not my son. He's waving his hand in the air like a madman. They call him up, and he says to 100 parents, kids, and troop leaders, "My daddy told me all I had to do is eat a brownie to become a Boy Scout." And that is the funniest memory I have with my son. Oh, my parents always talk about the time they got my brother his new bike when he was about 10. He'd only ever ridden BMX-style bikes with kick brakes. His new bike had hand brakes. We took a trip to Yosemite and he went down a hill, built up speed and panicked. He forgot how to use the brakes and slammed into a UPS truck at full tilt. It was hilarious to my parents because he was okay, but the UPS guy was super confused about what hit him. When he finally understood what had happened, he was cracking up. Basically, every time my folks get a drink in them, they laugh about the time they and a UPS guy laughed at my brother for crashing his bike. I apparently left our apartment by myself and went to a nearby playground to mess around when I was 3. My mum has a degenerative spine disease, and I remember when I was around 5, I learned in Sunday school that we'd be made perfect in heaven. I was really excited that my mum's back would be perfect in heaven and that she would be able to run and play with me. I told everyone that someday my mum's back wouldn't hurt. Soon after, we went to Walmart and one of the greeters was missing a hand. Apparently, I ran up to the man, put my hand on his stump, locked eyes with him and said, "In heaven, you'll have your hand back and you'll be perfect." He actually started crying a little and hugged me, but at the time, my mum was horrified that I'd grab a stranger like that without any hesitation. I think how you feel about this one might depend on your religious affiliation. I guess the good intention was there, and at least it turns out that this person took it the right way. But yeah, if someone told me to cheer up because things would be better in the Christian afterlife, I would be baffled at best and disgruntled at worst. My favorite dumb childhood story isn't mine, but my brother's. He was 6 and I was about 3. We had a huge backyard at that house with tons of bushes and trees to play hide and seek in, a big abandoned shed in the back with spooky stuff inside, and a river below so that we spent almost all of our free time outside. One day we were playing outside all afternoon and my brother mentioned something about needing to go to the bathroom. We agreed that it didn't make sense to pause the game to go the whole way back to the house and upstairs to the bathroom. I assumed that this meant he'd pee in the bushes or something, but it turned out he needed to go number 2, and he proceeded to just straight up crap his pants. We only played a few more minutes before our mum called us for dinner. I watched my brother waddle back into the house, his pants becoming droopier with each step. He walked confidently into the kitchen and sat down at the table as though nothing was wrong. My mother took one sniff and said, "Timmy, did you have an accident in your pants out there?" Still full of confidence, my brother looks her dead in the eye and says, "No," and picks up his silverware like he's about to eat. My dad just sighed, grabbed him by the collar, and dragged him upstairs to take a bath without another word. My brother pretends that he doesn't remember this incident, but I will never let that story die. I used to live in a brand new neighborhood. I had a friend that lived nearby, and the fastest way to get to his house was to cut across this dirt lot behind my house. One time it was raining, and I decided that I was going to go chill with my friend. I ended up stuck knee-deep in the mud. Like, completely stuck. I lost a shoe, had to have my dad pull me out. Of course, my parents have it on camera. Of course, it got played at least once every 5 years. Thankfully, that video died a slow VHS death. Oh, my grandma loved this story. She and my family loved it enough that they told it at her funeral. I'm 21 now, but when I was about 4, I'd gotten up in the middle of the night and gone downstairs to mess around. I decided to play with the phone. Then, I decided I should use my recently acquired phone skills to call my grandmother. Her number was one of the first ones I'd ever memorized. Mind you, it was like 2:30 in the morning by that point. So my grandmother actually got up and answered the phone, thinking it had to be important if someone was calling at this time. Nope. She answered the phone and the first thing out of my mouth was, "Mama, what are you doing up?" in my scoldy kid voice. My family thinks it's pretty funny. I pooped in the tub when I was around 3 years old. I started screaming and crying, and when my mum walked in, I screamed, "Look at what you made me do!" To this day, she brings it up and I laughed just typing it out. Oh god, the amount of times I've heard my mum tell this story. She told me to stop playing and come eat dinner, and I responded by saying I already ate. When? Yesterday. One time when I was young, I was helping my dad de-root dandelions out of our yard. After a while, I was like, why are there so many of these frickin' things? And my dad said, well, there was this little boy who came into our yard and spread dandelion seeds everywhere. I said, annoyed, we should kick his butt. It was me. I was the one who spread the seeds. There was one night when my parents learned I knew how to escape my crib. From what they've told me, there was one night where I found my way out of there. I then crawled all the way downstairs to the kitchen to get a jar of pickles. There was a pickle jar in the door of the fridge and I took it out and began to carry it back upstairs to my room. However, upon getting upstairs, or sooner, I'm not sure, I discovered I couldn't open them. Imagine my mother's horror as I woke her and my dad up holding a pickle jar saying one of the only words I knew. Open! I think I was about 2 years old. I was walking through a shopping mall when I was about 3 years old. I asked my mum to buy something. She said no, so I decided to throw it on the ground and proceeded to scream at her to get in the effing bin. She was shocked, obviously, but more concerned about where I'd learned such a thing. Fast forward a couple of days and my mum could hear my dad yelling at the dog that he'd put him in the fricking bin if he dug one more hole. And my mum tells this story all the time. I love it. I was always a very chatty little kid. Occasionally, that caused problems for my parents. For example, one time when I was about 4 or 5, we were preparing to go visit my dad's side of the family for Christmas. They all smoke, a habit of which my mum rigorously disapproves. Anyway, this particular day we were packing our stuff. My dad asked my mum if we should bring the video camera along. Crankily, my mum snarled back, "Why bother? You can't see anything anyway, not through the haze of smoke. It's probably bad for the lens." My dad just sort of laughed, and we didn't bring the camera. It was one of those huge old ones. It was a lot of trouble to pack. So, fine and dandy, right? It was about a 6-hour journey. We finally get there, and we're hanging out. My Grammy says to me, "Hey Bobby, did your parents bring the video camera to record you opening your presents?" And without missing a beat, I cheerily replied, "No, Mummy says you can't see anything through the fog of smoke anyway, so why bother?" Then I went skipping merrily away while my poor mother probably sank to the floor in shame. My cat never used to eat her biscuits in front of me, and I never understood why, so I used to get on my hands and knees and show her how to eat them, by eating them myself. The other favorite was when I was really into making potions in the backyard. I had my first crush and knew I needed my own DNA to make a love potion work, so I cut what I thought was a little bit of my hair off to put it in. I ended up cutting an uneven, massive chunk of my fringe. I remember crying behind a book at school the next day because the boy I had a crush on would never like me back because of how bad my fringe looked and because the love potion didn't work. Who was the smartest criminal you've ever encountered? I worked with this one guy who had a lengthy record. He had a system for getting released if he got caught too. After committing a crime, if the police were in pursuit and he knew he was about to be cornered, he'd act insane. His girl would play along with it, telling the police that he was off his meds. The police would arrest him but then send him to a mental ward with papers instructing his ward to release to police custody once he was cleared. Once he was in the mental ward, he'd cause a distraction to make the person attending the desk with the file cabinet leave said cabinet. He'd then crawl to the file cabinet, look for his release to custody papers, and then would literally eat those. When the psych evaluators decided he was stable enough to be released, there'd be no instructions to send him to the cops, and he'd be released to the general public instead. He did this about 10 times until the cops noticed him back on the streets. This stunt forced the state to change their procedures for detaining mentally unstable suspects. My favorite was the guy who stole a post office mailbox off the street, repainted it, and then put it next to the night deposit box at a bank. He hung an out-of-order sign on the deposit box. All the businesses came along and dropped off their deposits inside the mailbox. I'm not a cop, but I worked crime scenes. This guy had attached a GPS to the bottom of people's cars who owned houses that he wanted to rob. He did it to ensure they wouldn't be showing up while he was ransacking the place. I heard about one person that pulled a shoplifting scam on a large, popular, and well-known US retail store. They walked in with some cheap nylon products to get one of those "I walked in with this" stickers that they used on returning merchandise. That sticker easily peeled off the product undamaged. They walked to the electronics department, grabbed an expensive box off the shelf, and went to customer service. They placed the sticker on the big box and asked if they could return the item without a receipt. Unfortunately, no, not without the original receipt. Ah, dang it, and they walked out. Customer service even gave the doorman the thumbs up, having just interacted with the customer. This took place before widespread inventory controls and cameras absolutely everywhere. A guy I went to high school with had been stealing from Walmart in a pretty clever way. He'd grab video games, MP3s, beers and stuff, and throw them away in a trash can in the garden section. The workers never checked the trash contents and he'd just wait. Sometimes 5 hours until they emptied the trash in the back dumpster, and then he'd hop on in to get his items. Once he took a cardboard box from a display inside, filled it with video games, a PS3 and extra controllers. He grabbed some tape and pens and drew all over the box and taped it up to make it look used and tossed it. An hour later, he had a whole new PS3 and a stack of games. My goodness. I should state that people should not be looking at this video as a means of inspiration for ways to do this sort of thing in real life. It's entirely possible that a lot of stores have countermeasures in place to stop things like this, and the risk of getting caught is not worth it. This was in the late 90s and early noughties. A guy in my dorm came to school solely to deal substances. He took out student loans, registered for a bunch of 300-person freshman survey courses where he'd never be missed, and then literally never went to class. All he did was go to raves and concerts and keggers and sell stuff at parties. After the first semester, he was suspended. He wrote the usual, "I was young and dumb and in over my head" sob story and got put on probation for 1 semester. So he had a repeat of that in the fall. At the end of the year, he was kicked out, but he didn't care. He had made something in the order of 150 grand in return for about 8 grand in student loans to cover a year of housing and tuition. So as far as I know, he was never caught. It might have been a short-sighted maneuver in the long run, but in the short run it seemed fairly genius to effectively use federal loans to start your substance empire. Working in a home improvement store when I was younger, this guy came in, went to the snowblowers, took one and went to the return desk. Said he wanted to return it but had no receipt. They told him, "You need a receipt," so he says, "Okay, I'll be back," and he wheels it off to the car through the front door. He did this a few times apparently. A couple of places even helped him load it back into his car. I had a guy try that with the big expensive bedding sets at Sears 20 years ago. He came up the escalator empty-handed, walked into the first aisle and came out carrying the set. He said he wanted to return it. I said he needed a receipt, and when he asked why, I explained. Well, sometimes we have issues with people coming up here, taking stuff off the shelves and trying to return it. He looked a bit squirrely, then kind of looked around, panicked, and left with it. On the way to the door, security started following him, so he threw it at them and sprinted out the door. I'm going to be frank with you, most criminals are really stupid, so maybe this guy isn't a criminal mastermind, but here goes. He wanted to rob a jeweler's on our city's main street. He found out the flat beside the jeweler's was empty and he hid there. For 2 weeks, he triggered the alarm on purpose several times a night, causing a massive headache for the police and the business. We turned up to see there was nothing there, nothing on the cameras, and we thought it was just a fluke so that the jewelers turned off the alarm system and said that they'd wait until the morning to get a new one installed or that one rewired because clearly something wasn't right. As soon as he heard that and that the police were leaving, he tore down the wall, he'd already made some progress here apparently, and robbed the place taking his sweet time. He escaped without anyone noticing for hours until the jewelers came back in the morning. The problem was he then tried to resell something he stole which had a serial number on it and he got caught. So not that smart after all. Good effort though. There's a golf course and country club in my town that has a PGA tournament scheduled in the next couple of years. They have a guy repeatedly breaking in overnight and just lounging around and eating food, all on camera. The club refuses to report it so they don't hurt their chances of the tournament coming. I worked at a jail. After getting off work, I watched an ex-inmate, who was homeless, being released. He walked over to the patrol car, looked me in the eye and elbowed the window in. He was walked back to the entrance and rebooked in. It was middle of January. I guess he didn't want to get too cold. A French thief who spent 10 years in prison became a comedian when he got out. One of his stories was finding a building, going in, choosing a floor, and transforming the exit door into something that looked like the front door of another apartment. He puts the apartment number, the fake lock-in, the welcome rug, stuff like that. He puts an iPhone up for sale. The person comes to buy it. He opens the door in a shower robe and says, "Oh, give me 1 second, I'm just going to count the money." And then poof, he's gone from the exit stairs. One guy would print barcodes, bring them into Home Depot and stick them on merchandise in the $100 range. When he scanned the items, they came up at around the $10 range. Putting random barcodes on things isn't really illegal and super hard to notice. Guy number 2 would come in an hour later and buy the underpriced stuff. Complete plausible deniability. They'd then sell the stuff on eBay. The only reason they got caught was because the guy with the barcode printer and software cut the second guy out of the operation, so guy 2 stole a bunch of barcodes, put them on the merchandise and paid for it immediately afterwards. He then proceeded to rat on the first guy and spilled the beans because they'd been doing this on a weekly basis for over 4 years. Because we could only pin the one case on him, the burglary was dropped down to a petty theft and he walked away with a few days in county and a small fine. The guy probably took Home Depot for tens of thousands over the years. Definitely that guy in Ohio who ate the bank robbery note, which is important evidence, right off the hood of the police car when they were emptying his pockets, although I'm fairly sure he was still convicted. A friend of my brother moved to Israel, where for a period of time it was acceptable to drive with an American driver's license. He was pulled over for speeding, and when asked for his license, gave the officer his Costco card. Costco is a membership-based retail warehouse in the US and a few other countries. The exchange apparently went something like this. The officer asked, "Costco, what is Costco?" My friend said, "Oh, it's the state I'm from." That sounds made up. There are a lot of states you probably haven't heard of. Have you heard of Arkansas? How about Idaho? Oh, I guess not. Well, I'm from the small state of Costco. The officer didn't even have a response and wound up writing the ticket to someone with a Costco driver's license. My friend framed the ticket and still has it hanging up on his wall. That reminds me of a family friend of mine, very funny Australian with an absolutely horrendous bogan accent. Well, late 80s, he's driving through Texas and runs a red light, and he's immediately pulled over by a 250-pound Texan police officer with an equally horrendous accent. The way the story goes, this man is obviously not the brightest cop. So our friend, when asked about running a red light, gets very apologetic and explains that he gets easily confused because in Australia, you know how things are reversed down there, red means go and green means stop. The cop actually let this man go with a warning. "You know, I did not know that. Well, in America, red means stop, so don't make this mistake again." Classic Aussies. And honestly, I think although the rest of the world is a little harsh on Americans, especially the ones in the Deep South, that cop wasn't doing that particular stereotype any favors either. Here's one. I knew this guy back in the early 80s. Let's call him Jim. Well, he really wanted this high-powered superbike, but he knew he couldn't ever afford it, so what he did was take a drive to London and scout it about for a few days until he found that particular model parked outside of a house. He goes back that night with a slide hammer, pulls the lock and steals the bike. He gets home, puts it in his garage and completely strips it so that the only thing left is the frame and the bottom half of the engine, which he drags into the weeds at the bottom of his garden. He then pours fuel all over it and burns it a bit. A few weeks pass and weeds have started growing over it. It's at that point that he calls the cops and reports that someone's dumped a bike frame in his garden. The cops show up and he explains that he'd just got back from being away and found it. The cops take the frame and note down his name and address. A few days later, the cops call him and say that the bike had been stolen from London a month or so ago, from the serial number on the bottom half of the engine and frame. But they say that the insurance company had classed the bike as a write-off and had told the cops to dispose of it. Now, because the frame was found in his garden and the insurance company didn't want it, the cops were duty-bound to ask him if he wanted it or if they should throw it. So he tells them that he's always wanted to build a bike. He gets the frame back from them, repaints it and then puts it all back together and re-registers it as a Q-Reg, stolen and recovered. To all the people asking if I'm Jim, no, I'm not. I knew him well enough though. We went to school together and he lived a few doors down from me. I had my own group of friends and occasionally when out at the pub, we'd bump into him and he'd tell us of his exploits without a care in the world. As far as that bike goes, he proudly told a few people about it, but you know, we don't grass. He crashed the bike a few months later and was injured, but I can't remember how. He was pretty much a career criminal the last time I saw him and he ended up in jail for a while. While many regard him as scum, I always felt kind of bad for Jim. Both of his parents died before he was 12 and he was in and out of care homes for years. Out of his 4 brothers, one was murdered, the other died of an asthma attack, and another just decided he didn't want to live on this planet anymore and peaced out. Jim could never hold down a job and also suffered from depression. That bloke had a crap life. It's been more than 25 years since I last saw him, and I often wonder how he's doing. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I mean, I think the real geniuses are the ones whose crimes we never hear about. But with that being said, I had a guy use a sledgehammer to smash his way through a wall at Best Buy and steal a bunch of phones and cameras. He was smart enough to wear gloves and a face mask and not touch anything that he didn't have to. The alarms didn't go off until he exited out the back door, which the alarm company gets after a minute or two, and then it took them like 3 or 4 minutes to call in to us, giving him a good 5-minute head start, so he was probably a few miles away before we got dispatched to it. He'd clearly scoped out the area before doing this as well. Smart guy. I heard about this one guy who had cut the power to electrical stations. He'd damaged the wiring and then hide, waiting for the cops to show up. Once the owners of the buildings came, they'd shut off the power because of the unsafe wiring that would have to be repaired in the morning. Everyone would leave for the night, then he'd come out of hiding and cut away all of the non-powered wiring to get the copper. I used to run bars at a number of venues around the north of England, one of which was Chester Racecourse. Usually, we'd just have to keep an eye out for scousers trying to steal drinks or sneak in without paying, and with it being so close to Liverpool, there was a fair amount of security on site. You could tell them as they'd be suited, booted, with a high-vis waistcoat and usually carrying a radio. Now, there were a dozen or so bars dotted around the course, and you can imagine the amount of money that was taken from 100,000 or so punters drinking steadily from 11 until 8 or 9 in the evening. So every hour or so, the security would go round the bars in turn and take all of the high-denomination notes from each till and stack them in the safe in the main building. So I'm stood there one day, pulling pints, doing the barman thing. The security blokes have been around a few times and it's getting steadily busier. Then one bloke shows up on his own, high-vis and radio in his hand, does the till, leaving the usual receipt so he can balance up at the end of the meeting. A bit early, I think, but hey-ho, I've got plenty to do. Then, 10 minutes or so later, 2 more blokes show up dressed the same. "Oh, your mate's just been here," I said. "No need to touch that just yet." "What mate? We're the only 2 doing this duty today." Cue a rapid-fire and increasingly panicked exchange over the radio. Matey boy who'd done the till just before must have been someone who'd used to work there, so he knew the drill and had been watching the guards and knew just when to time it and what order they were going around the bars in. Apparently, he got through about 9 or 10 of them before he decided to not push his luck any further and just walked away with about 80 grand. He must have just taken off the high-vis, dumped that and the radio, and now he's just one more guy in a suit in a crowd of thousands. They were a bit stricter on the procedure after that. We got called for a rollover car accident. We get there and the car is empty, so we think he got ejected. My partner and I start looking for a body nearby. A few minutes later, a cop tells us that they think the driver is a mile down the road walking. We go and check on him and he tells us he's fine, but he wasn't driving the car. He also didn't know who was driving the car and he had clearly been drinking. During the ride to the ER, he told me that as long as the cops don't find you in the car, the local DA won't pursue drunk driving charges. All you had to do was get out of the car and walk away from it. I have a friend who's no longer a criminal but committed crimes for about 15 years and never got arrested or even investigated. Some of his highlights were growing green herb in a shed on his neighbor's property. The neighbor was old and never left the house. Also buying a building under a fake name, taking out huge loans against it, getting HUD money, and burning it all down. Selling fake raffle tickets to raffle out stuff he'd never had and never raffled. I can't remember how many times he pulled that scam, but he bought a new car with the money. He also moved a bunch of times because people would suspect him of being a con man. His dad was in jail for similar stuff, but he was never even questioned by the police about anything. Now he has a family and a normal job. I first heard about the story about 10 years ago in Banff, Alberta. Never bothered to look up what was real versus what was invented. I think it's pretty close. But as my father used to say, you can't let the truth get in the way of a good story. There's a small tourist town where I grew up that's divided in half by a big river. The only way in between the two sides is over a long bridge, unless you go all the way around another mountain pass. These guys called in like 2 or 3 bomb threats to a posh hotel on one side of the bridge. I think they even left some dummy packages. All the police went across the bridge to do crowd control and stuff, then the guys called in a bomb threat on the bridge, and started robbing stuff on the other side. The police couldn't be positive that the bomb threat was real or not, and they hesitated long enough to give the thieves a head start. I am getting a bit of a laugh at the mental image of the town's police trying to commandeer one of the town's only rowboats and engage in a disorganized, messy scramble in it across the river. Probably not, as then they'd have to pursue on foot, but a man can dream about these cartoony scenarios. The story of the Mumbai Opera House jewelry heist probably belongs here. Sometime in 1987, a guy placed an ad in the newspaper looking for recruits to the CBI, the investigative police agency in India. A bunch of people showed up. He had rented an office to interview them. He selected 26 of the candidates, told them to assemble the next day near a popular jewelry shop to practice a mock raid. He had a fake search warrant and everything handy. Then he led these guys to conduct a raid on the jewelry shop. Together, they collected all the jewelry there, took all the cash, and then he asked the trainees to keep a watch on the shop employees while he deposited the stuff. He then walked out and disappeared. Took half an hour for someone to suspect something wrong and call the actual police. They never caught the guy, never even found out who he was. The pair on that man, my goodness. I wouldn't call this the smartest thing ever, but it was pretty clever and amusing. A while ago, there was a series of thefts along the bus lines in my country. People's things kept missing from one city to the next, and nobody had any idea what was happening, as things were presumably safe in the bottom of the bus, which nobody except the driver had access to. So, what happened? Apparently there were two guys, one of whom was really small. You get where this was going. The big guy would put the little guy in the suitcase, buy a ticket to somewhere, load him up with the rest of the luggage, and enjoy the ride, while the little guy went out, stole people's electronics, jewelry, cameras, and whatnot, and then returned to his suitcase until the ride was over. I'm not really sure how they caught them, but it was pretty amusing to read about, and I found the whole thing clever enough. I remember getting into a festival and seeing a magician guy do tricks on the people searching him to distract them from the substances he had on him. Spectacular show, and I'm sure he made a good profit. I doubt the officers ever knew about it. Guy noticed that the bank vault had put its safety deposit box in a way where there was a space at the 90-degree point where wall meets wall. He times it on a Friday and climbs in and hides in that spot. He'd actually rented out a box which he put in a clock, which alarmed violently to see if there were sound sensors in the vault. He waited outside, nothing. Employees closed the vault with him inside. He has the whole weekend and gets to knocking the locks out with a hammer one at a time and stole everything. He then replaced the locks to look like they're not tampered with and jumped back into the spot. Monday morning, the vault was open. Turns out the bank's doing renovations. He picks that day, throws on a worker's jacket and literally walks out of the bank. Employees didn't notice till the first person who came to open his safety deposit box. The lock fell in. They couldn't identify who did it, and he would have got away with it save for his big mouth. Turns out he was a hairdresser and kept telling his customers how he stole from the bank and he was a genius and they'd never catch him. Somebody snitched and he was picked up. They couldn't value what he stole as safety box contents are unknown. Because of this guy, all banks now fill the space where the two safety cabinets meet with concrete. They made a movie, Inside Man, loosely based on him. His name was William Smarto. My friend Alan had a warrant for traffic offense. One day he received a phone call from his friend Ben. Ben told Alan, "Remember that traffic warrant you have? You don't need to worry about it anymore. I took care of it." Ben went on to explain that he had been arrested for a minor offense and received community service for his sentence. The community service job he received was filing at the municipal court. He came across Alan's warrant and destroyed it. A few months later, Alan was stopped for another traffic offense. The officer told Alan, "Computer shows a warrant for you. I'm placing you under arrest." While Alan sat in the back seat of the squad car, the dispatcher radioed the officer, "I was unable to get confirmation on that warrant," and Alan was released. At least in those days, the police wouldn't arrest someone on a warrant unless a police department employee could lay his hands on an actual paper warrant and confirm that it existed. Teachers, what made you finally give up teaching at your school? Not me, but my wife. She was an engineer at a good company on the East Coast, left because she wanted more rewarding work. Soon after, she was doing clinicals at a school on the rough side of our hometown. She was the kind of student teacher who showed up early, ate lunch with the kids, stayed late, and followed up with parents. Anyway, some months in, she's repeatedly had trouble with some students. Many of them came from troubled homes and brought a lot with them into the class each day. She tried working with them one-on-one, working with the administration and the parents. More than one set of parents said, "Stop calling," and the administration told her to send them to the principal's office, where they could sit all day and just focus on the good kids. Eventually, the futility set in. She was the only one who cared. Not the kids, administration, other teachers, or even their parents. She finally wore herself out after a couple of years with no support at work and nobody appreciating her efforts. Except me, of course. She's back in aerospace now. I worked in a high-needs behavior class. I got hit, punched, and scratched and spat on daily. But every day I went back and did my best for those kids. I was so battered and bruised that my husband wouldn't shop with me anymore because people would stare and sometimes even comment to him about his mistreating me. It was sickening, but I loved my job and every one of those kids. One day I was called into the office to talk. It was Christmas time and things weren't great at home, and as anyone with kids knows, the holidays makes children especially high-strung, so things were also wild in the classroom. My boss said, "You seem awfully stressed," and I thought how nice of her to notice, so I agreed that yes, I was struggling. She said, "You have 6 weeks to sort it out or I'll have to let you go." I was crushed. It literally broke me. 6 weeks to just get less stressed? How does that even work? I found myself just showing up to show up, and I realized it wasn't fair for me or the kids. 6 weeks later, I got a call back to the office. I was congratulated on the amazing turnaround and sent back to class. I was baffled. I was more upset and stressed than ever, and they congratulated me? More and more, I showed up to work just for the paycheck. One day I just decided, screw it, I wasn't a teacher anymore. I was a robot fearful of showing any negativity. I quit that week. Never went back to teaching. So many things. I figured I got paid $9 an hour to handle special needs and the future of our country, and other teachers didn't have it that much better. I watched an entire class plagiarize an essay because they couldn't fathom how to write something original. Turned in a girl for skipping class only to have to write a police report on why I didn't call her a stupid witch and hit her. And she never got punished for filing that false report. Observed a kid who I knew to be a psychopath convince a freshman to steal a phone. The freshman got caught and had 10 days in juvie. The psychopath walked free. You're going to have to pay teachers a lot more to deal with that crap. I taught at a juvenile delinquent school when the accusations of children required no proof or consistency, and to be exonerated took divine intervention. When a kid with a violent history a mile wrong swings a stapler at you, gashing your forehead because he was dared to by someone else, then you restrain him until help arrives. Apparently, you're in trouble for hurting his wrist. Then your school believes his story that I dropped the N-bomb to him which caused the outburst, even though 2 other staff members saw the entire thing. And the school called the police and tried to have me charged for attacking him. I mean, on the one hand, I'm nearly glad that the institution took the complaints of kids that seriously, as these juvenile detention places in the past are pretty well known for neglecting kids to all kinds of hardship and exploitation. But then I guess we overcorrected. It's insane that you weren't even backed up by the fact that you had 2 staff witnesses. Did they say nothing? I had a student, maybe 11 or 12, sitting with me and having pizza. I asked her how life was going, and she says, "Well, my dad's a dealer, so he's always got people coming over to sell or buy stuff or play cards, so I can't sleep. My mom's dying because she has a hole in her heart and they can't fix it. And I have a boyfriend, but I'm afraid to tell my mom because she'll tell my dad and he'll get real mad." Just said that all normal, like it was everyday stuff. So, as a mandatory reporter, I go to my dean of students and tell him all this, and he just gets irritated and goes, "Yes, well, that doesn't excuse her behavior." And that's when I knew I was done. The child in question was frequently a bit of a butthole, but again, frickin' crazy life at home. When I realized that I was being more micromanaged every year, I expected a lot of oversight when I was a new teacher. I actually had more people watching my every move and every word after a master's degree and 15 years experience. I never had a single complaint. Parents and students loved me, even requested me. But administrators needing to justify their jobs were constantly in my classroom or calling pointless meetings to discuss pointless things. I spent less and less time teaching and more time filling out meaningless forms, responding to emails, and sitting through meetings. God, this was so frustrating to see happen to my history teacher when I was a student. Great teacher, got really good exam results, students liked him, parents liked him, and he was involved in running several extracurricular groups like hockey team, debating, cadets, and he was a boarding house master. He'd been teaching for 35 years, and yet he was having more and more random inspections of lessons, as OFSTED didn't like him because he was unconventional, and his head of department didn't like him because he had worked there 33 years longer and got better results. End result, after months of watching most of his lessons, they pointed at how laid back the lessons were and said he had a critical lack of discipline and asked him to leave. Meaning he lost his job, and since he lived in the boarding houses, his home of the last 30 years. You see, what they were doing there wasn't actually micromanagement, but they were looking for an excuse to fire him before he could retire so that they could save money. I've seen that happen to 2 separate teachers. My grandfather was a teacher, and the school district he worked for went a different route and bought out teachers into early retirement, but that was over 30 years ago. 2 16-year-old kids were facing each other. I had the classroom seats in a U-shape, and they were silently challenging each other to fight while I was in the middle of a lesson. They suddenly jumped up from their chairs and came at each other with 8-inch knives with me in between them. I was pretty built, having been a stonemason's apprentice in college to help pay my way through, but these kids were both bigger than me. Without thinking, I grabbed each by their collars and shouted, "Sit down!" I didn't start shaking until that evening, and I was done a week later. I taught high school English for 10 years before finally quitting for the corporate sector. Honestly, it was a lot of small things that built and built until I realized it just wasn't where I wanted to be. The largest of those small things is stifling focus on standardized testing. I lost weeks and weeks to test prep at every grade level. I couldn't teach novels I loved teaching because I ran out of time. And those standardized tests are useless. They prove nothing, but they offer schools a pat on the back for high performance results, which, mind you, do not transfer at all to college success. And too many public schools force the idea of college. Why? Is it because it's for the betterment of kids? No. It looks good on their graduation statistics. But the thing is, there's nothing wrong with not going to college, and I'd tell that to my advanced placement students as much as my kids with a 12 average for the year. You have a 3.8 GPA and want to be a plumber? You go. You be a plumber. Screw it. You'll make more than the rest of us. I was told once I shouldn't do so many lessons where discussion between students was required. No more Socratic seminars. There had to be more, quote, material that could be graded. How messed up is that? I can't encourage discussion in an English literature class because I can't grade the kids on that discussion. And don't even get me started on quantitative versus qualitative. Teachers are being held accountable for students who, quote, don't improve, regardless of anything else. Jimmy doesn't come to school for 3 months because he's screwing off and then shows back up and fails the midterm? That's on you, buddy. You should have taught him better for the 2 weeks you had him at the start of the year. I eventually got tired of the constant hurdles and stupid state requirements. People said, yeah, but you get a pension, unions, summers off. So the F what? I'm in corporate now and I make $31,000 more than I did teaching with a yearly bonus and a matching 401k with profit sharing. And which, please, I never had a summer off. I worked 2 jobs to make ends meet from June to September. Most teachers do. What kills me is that I loved teaching. I loved my students and I was good at what I did. I was good at encouraging kids to take risks with their learning, and I didn't penalize them for making mistakes. That's how you learn. You don't learn anything from multiple choice, and you never will. I miss my kids. I miss watching them go from hating a piece to being eager to discuss it. Even my lowest level students could show me something, even if it wasn't on paper. It wasn't my students that killed my love for teaching, and I did have kids throw chairs or get into fights or tell me to F off. All of that was doable, and I did it. The stupid, useless requirements from the idiotic state testing, the abysmal pay for the hours and hours I put in, that killed my love for teaching. And it's killing plenty of other young, passionate educators. I miss my students. I miss everything about teaching when I was allowed to do it. Now, it's not teaching. If you want to teach, get into higher education or a private school. Do yourself a favor and stay out of public education in the United States. It doesn't exist anymore. Well, that's grim, and not a good sign if people start following the advice. Public education is so damn important, and the fact that this is going to impact economically disadvantaged families first when the good teachers start bailing is just not pointing to a good societal direction. It's just going to keep on widening that big old gap in inequality in our society. I don't know what to do about the problem. I guess we can only thank our stars for the people who do their best in the system, and when you can, publicly advocate for the good guys, or stick up for your teachers if you think that they're being screwed by the school. I had a 6-year-old pull a knife on me while screaming, "I'll kill you!" This was the culmination of a lot of various incidents with the same kid. What was most infuriating was the parents claiming they had the sweetest little boy and that we, the school, must be liars for saying otherwise. Eventually, he was transferred to a special school after we filed a report for the various incidents. I feel really bad for the kid because when he wasn't freaking out over something, he would be the sweetest guy, asking a ton of questions and participating in the activities. But he was highly prone to snapping into hysteria. The incident with the knife happened in this after-school setting where the kids go to play and have fun. Apparently, another kid had done something he disliked, so he was kicking and spitting on him when I pulled him away. He ran straight to the drawer, found a little kitchen knife, and due to his size, it was pretty easy to wrestle it out of his hands though, so no harm done. I guess dealing with crappy parents was what made me change my career. I stopped when my annual review with the new program dean focused on the 10% of student reviews that were negative rather than the 90% that were positive. There are too many aggravations working against teachers. At the very least, the administration should have your back. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I realized that I couldn't even escape teaching in my dreams, my life was so focused on teaching that every night I had nightmares about it. Followed by the pain I feel in my chest from heart palpitations, my heart would constantly race and then stop altogether. Finally, when on the last day of Thanksgiving break, I realized that I'd cried every single day because I didn't want to go back to school. I was so low that I'd planned a way to just not be alive anymore to get out of teaching, but I figured life had to improve if I just quit, even if I'd be another unemployed millennial statistic. I lasted 15 months. The only thing that makes me feel a little better about the situation is that the retired cop who replaced me only lasted 3 months. He'd been an officer in the same city that I was teaching. When the corporate job offered me 3 times the salary and a 12% annual bonus. Now my kids can afford to go to the college where Dad used to teach. There wasn't one defining moment that made me decide to quit, but after the decision was made, there was a moment that solidified it. There was this one kid. To say he wasn't bright would be an understatement. He probably should have been diagnosed at some point as special education, but he never was. He was also a butthole. I taught 8th grade math, and he literally couldn't even multiply. So I'd give him the same tests that I gave my special education students. He'd usually fail anyway, but not as badly. Anyway, he never figured out he was given a different test. When I made the different versions, they were essentially the same questions, just with much easier numbers to work with. Well, one day I was grading his test and he missed every single question. The weird thing was, he had all the correct answers to the normal test. However, he showed no work. So there was literally no way with the numbers he had that he could have got the answers he got. So I called in his mum. I had to stay like an hour later than normal to meet with her, and I presented her the evidence, which most people would find pretty convincing. She just turned to him and said, "Did you cheat?" And he of course denies it. Then she looks at me and says, "Well, you say he cheated. He says he didn't. I don't know who to believe." And I got up and left right then. Parents are the reason most teachers leave the profession. They tend to make the teacher the enemy quite often. Plus, they just don't want to acknowledge that their kids are little bags of crap. When I tried to have a conversation about literature with the head of my department and got a blank stare in return, I taught English. I'm doing my PhD now and I'm surrounded by faculty and students who are significantly more engaged than her. My decision to quit was a 2-step process. First, I taught high school English in rural Illinois. When I wasn't debating students after class because they didn't like the B+ I'd given them, I was frequently given implicit instructions by the administration to pass my failing students. Then I moved to Washington, D.C. and taught in the D.C. public school system and realized that I was merely a babysitter. Barely any of my students could read, but the goal of my school was containment. Priority was keeping the students in the classroom and not in the hallways. I was told I couldn't assign homework because the students wouldn't do it anyway. I couldn't give my students any textbooks because the students just dumped them in the trash after school. If kids are seen with books in their neighborhood, they're often ridiculed and sometimes beaten by their peers. Parent and teacher conferences often meant meeting with grandma, whose parenting style was, "Jesus will take care of it." When I was in college, I had dreams of teaching Julius Caesar to young people. Teaching turned out to be quite different. I have huge respect for the teachers who can do it, because I could not. First, I'll tell you about the moments when I nearly quit. When a kid with serious mental health issues shanked another kid with a pencil, and I was told to just keep a better eye on him. When a parent complained about me, but I wasn't told the nature of the complaint, just reprimanded generally. When 16-year-old boys hit on me and I actually considered going out drinking with them because I had no social life. But the moment, looking back, was when I was hospitalized with exhaustion and my amazing boyfriend, who had been coming over, marking tests and proofing papers every evening for months, lay down on the cold, hard hospital floor and slept beside me in case I was upset overnight. I realized that I wanted a life with him, not a dull existence where I poured all of myself into my job and had nothing left for us. I loved teaching, but it wanted all of me. Dawn till midnight, 7 days a week, prepping, marking, and planning. So I quit. I got a better job, I married that amazing guy, and we have an amazing daughter. On weekends, we go to the park and play. Teachers largely have always been an amazing group of passionate people in my eyes, but you equally hear about the ones who crush young people's spirits. And while I still obviously can't stand with those ones, when you look at the things that are gradually breaking some of these educators down as human beings, you can at least understand why they turned out that way, even if you think maybe they should have just quit instead. I'm glad this commenter got a lovely escape after putting in their time and effort. I walked in on a PE teacher engaging in a horrific misuse of power with a student. A fight ensued, the cops were called. The school initially covers it up as 2 teachers just fighting, but they didn't specify over what. The court case had a gag order, so basically no one knew other than a dozen or so people. He was out on leave, and I was not. The union backed him up as he had seniority. They lost anyway, but I was basically being blackballed for being a good person just because I was the new guy. The court case finishes, he goes to prison, I get blamed by the other staff for setting him up because apparently I wanted his job. Mind you, I taught science and chemistry, not exactly the prime candidate for a PE class. There was a staff meeting on how to help students who might have questions or problems about what happened finally getting out, and it turns into a blame session. People were more concerned with having to actually do their jobs than they were with a student being mistreated on campus, or that some kids might have issues with that. I pretty much snapped at that point and burnt every bridge I could. I ran down every teacher in the meeting, said a few less than polite things about their professional credentials and personal standing as human beings, that they were treating me like a pariah for being a good person instead of blaming the guy who was ruining the life of a 13-year-old, and told the union rep that they could die in a fire for all I care for being a crap-sucking waste of space, and I walked out. I wrote an open letter to the PTA, the newspaper, and every parent I had contact information for about the entire incident from start to finish. The public backlash was brutal. The union replaced that rep, the school board reassigned no small amount of their staff and put a handful on leave, and offered me my job back with a bonus, but I still told them to screw a cactus, dropped the mic and walked away. The girl's parents got her counseling with a very good person right away. They moved counties and put her in a better-run school district. She turned out very well, all things considered. She graduated with honors, went to law school. Not long ago, I was asked by her dean to give a speech at her commencement and hand her a diploma for her LLM. She's currently working on wrapping up her SJD, and I have no doubt she'll be a judge one day. And no, I don't still teach at public school. I did teach college briefly later on, but I've since been in IT. I'm not a hero. Really, I'm a bit of a butthole. I'll be the first to admit it. But I'm a butthole who knows right from wrong, and the sad thing is, that entails a hero in this day and age sometimes. I do like teaching, but I'm not very politically correct, so I mentor my staff now rather than teaching in a public setting. The pay is a lot better and the stress is a lot lower. I haven't taught physics or chemistry in over a decade. In short, avoid Solano County, California. Former teacher in the New York City public schools for 3 years, at the special ed school that was housed in the same building as the crappy charter school that Paul Ryan visited that one time. The charter school that he visited is on the top floor. My school was on the bottom 2. We had kids 4 through 15 at the school. I made $39K per year plus a bonus of $2,300 for working through the summer. Basically, that meant no summer break. 7 principals and 9 assistant principals in the 3 years due to a gang of teachers who thought that they could exercise their power by accusing every new administrator of mistreating the kids. Violence was extremely high in the school, both student to student and teacher to student. The police and/or the ambulance was there almost every year. There were absolutely no supplies offered, not even a pencil. I wrote grants and spent a ton of my own money. The parents were often dangerous. We had the same father come into the school with a weapon several times. Yes, we had a security guard at the front door. Apparently that doesn't matter. The guy just walked right in every time. We also had a dad that came in and started punching kindergarteners. I'd come in every day early to knock back the cockroaches off the walls so my little kiddos in wheelchairs didn't have to go to a school like that. I also picked up mouse droppings and carcasses and tried my best to clean the floors. You know those big floor buffers they use in public schools? We never had one of those in the school, so the floors were revolting and perma-dirty. I bought food for my students because the school lunches were so gosh darn awful, and I knew that that was possibly the only meal they were eating every day. I also bought baby wipes because many of the kids never had showers. And I spent a ton of time reporting the awful stuff that was happening to these kids. Because they'd come in with obvious signs like a footprint on their face, 2 black eyes, half of their braided hair missing, and also a bunch of the other teachers were monsters. I saw one bite a student. My paraprofessional cut a child's finger off by slamming the door on it, and I'm pretty sure it was on purpose. My school psychologist was taking kids home for the weekend for therapy. Ugh. The nail in the coffin was when they had to close the school to disperse the gang of teachers, the ones who were accusing the administration of misusing their power. It's almost impossible to fire a teacher in New York City, so this was the only thing they could do to separate the teachers into different schools. And then I couldn't find another job in a better school because everyone knew about the reputation of my crappy school. The worst part is that all of this is kind of normal for District 75 schools. That's what we call the special ed ones in New York City. All of my friends who worked in the D75 schools had the same sorts of issues. This wasn't a random occurrence. These D75s are dumping grounds for the neediest kids and dumping grounds for the worst NYC teachers, who get transferred there because they can't be fired. These kids often had nobody advocating for them because they were in the foster care system, or their parents were on substances or attacking them, or their caregivers were incarcerated, so they were just stuck in these horrible environments. At some point, you decide to save yourself, which is what I did. I'm still traumatized by the entire situation, and I often worry about the kids I worked with. I became an expert in autism intervention, and now I work directly with adults with ADHD. 100% would never go back to working in any school. What behavior is a deal breaker in someone who was otherwise the perfect match? The need to always be the one who's correct. Someone who's a bad guest at someone else's house. Actually, tonight my girlfriend said, "I love everything about you, but watching you eat unpeeled kiwis like they're apples really freaks me out." So maybe that one, we'll see. Went on a hiking date with someone who just littered. There was no second date. Don't litter, folks. It's selfish and it ruins the trails for everyone else. Might say something about you as a person. A girl who told me she had been engaged 6 times. She was 29. Look, I know things happen, but that's a lot of things. I really want to know what each of those things' breaking points was. I didn't press on at that point when she brought it up. I just remember it short-circuited my brain looking for a response. I think I just went with a, that's unfortunate. She was quite physically attractive, but that only goes so far. I had an ex who constantly lied and omitted things. Usually not about anything huge, but she had a habit of it and didn't seem to think it was wrong. The longer we dated, the worse it got. Eventually, it really divided us because I couldn't trust anything she said. From then on, if I discovered I was with someone who lied often as a tactic to get what they wanted, or to avoid consequences and stuff, that was pretty much the end of the relationship for me. I had a 3-year relationship with someone who lied about literally everything. It was a total mind screw because it took me a long time to realize that he was lying all the time, about even tiny things. I left him because of this, but it broke my heart because we'd had a fun life together. In time, I realized you can't be with someone like that. They just have no integrity at all. The short version, when she said, "How come you don't express yourself?" And after I expressed myself, said, "You're being too emotional. Get on out of here with that crap." And the longer version, well, I was dating a girl who said I didn't share your emotions enough and would complain that I was too stoic and reserved. I understood where she was coming from, so I started trying to open up more. One of the things I opened up about was my awful bullying ex who had gotten married recently and how I was dealing with a lot of unpleasant memories as a result. And her response was, "That's a lot of baggage. I don't like hearing about that kind of stuff. You just shouldn't let it affect you." Yeah, that ended things real frickin' quick. Yep, folks, do not ask that question if you're not prepared to deal with the fallout, because some people keep a lot inside or save it for their therapists or whatever. Not being a critical thinker. I've thought of a whole laundry list of things that would be deal breakers, but they all boil down to whether or not he could think critically. If the person you're dating makes you feel small, not in a physical sense, but like you're less than them, I learned that's my first sign to book it out of there. A guy I met who liked me and I didn't like back was like that. He'd say things like, "You have surprisingly nice legs for no exercise. I'm an active person, but what the frick?" Or he'd say things like, "Seriously? You can cook?" I couldn't believe that. He was adamant I give him a chance, but this was the main reason I didn't. Being condescending. I hate it. It makes me angry. Be nice to people. Accept that they might not be as knowledgeable as you are on a given subject. Don't condescend. Unapologetic, arrogant ignorance. Hoarding. I made this mistake once. I got into a relationship with a hoarder. I eventually realized that her deeply dysfunctional relationship to objects extended to the people around her. I was not an actual person, I was just another acquisition that was required and subsequently treated shabbily. I'm not sure if this was common, but I won't take the chance again. Just imagine you're sent to a room with like 50 other guys and they all say in unison, "Oh, another one, huh?" I wouldn't say that that's necessarily a common thing. My mom's a hoarder and she definitely loves the people in her life. However, a lot of hoarders are undiagnosed autistic or ADHD, and treatment of people like objects is often brought up in assessment criteria. It doesn't always mean they don't care about the person, but that they don't know how to express it. My mom is autistic, and the way she expresses her love is very atypical. It's not easy to have a hoarder in your life, though, and I wouldn't date one. My mom's hoarding has been various degrees of serious. It gets worse when she's depressed, and it can be so frustrating to watch someone you love do that to themselves. She'll ask for help, but won't accept it, and when it gets to the point that she's crying over a coat hanger that I threw out, I know that I need to back off and just be there for her rather than just trying to tidy her house. Hoarding is so complex and so effed up, and it hurts everyone involved. If they don't even attempt to get along with my friends, or watching videos on your phone volume all the way up at a restaurant on a double date. Believe it or not, I dated a guy that did both, and I cringe thinking back on it. Extreme materialism. Oh, this is it for me. I admit that I do consider myself a minimalist, but if people can't prioritize their finances because they need to live beyond their means, that's not hot. Never holding my hand or not having any non-bedroom related physical contact. He told me he'd much rather make small talk with a stranger than have a deep conversation with good friends. I don't know why I didn't see it before, but that perfectly described why we never connected on a deeper level after being together for 2 years. We tried, but I couldn't make it work after that realization. I'd like to add he's still one of the nicest people I know. We were friends for years before we started dating, and we still keep in contact now. He did tick a lot of boxes for me, but just not that really important one, and it was really, really vital for me. It was a tough decision to make, but I know we can both find someone who'll make us happier. My ex-boyfriend would always say, "Oh no, you want to do this, not that," every time I talked about doing something one way. It even crossed over into me researching or buying gear for backpacking or biking and stuff. He always seemed to know better than me, and I'll never be able to be with someone again who tells me what to do or what to buy or makes me feel like I don't know what I'm doing. If they're too selfish. If they have toxic friends, for lots of reasons. Adult tantrums. I dated someone who I thought was great, but would regularly yell and throw tantrums when frustrated. They weren't even directed at me, just general adult tantrums. It was almost funny at first because I didn't think it was serious. Oh boy, it was though. Scientology. Oh boy, do I have a story to tell. I was on a date. We went to see some Mars sci-fi movie. The film had bad reviews and the theater was nearly empty, so we were being chatty during the trailers. One of the trailers they show is for Battlefield Earth, and under my breath I say, "Fricking Scientology." I look over at my date and he's offended. My skin was crawling as I realized I was on a date with a Scientologist. The one that surprised me about myself was a whiny voice. People had everything else going for them, but after a few hours I just couldn't stand the thought of listening to that voice over the long haul. The need to constantly be on your phone. I'm totally fine with spending a lot of time on it, but if you can't put it down to watch a movie or have a conversation, then it's a problem. Dishonesty. If you notice the person you're interested in tells fibs or little white lies early on, it's only going to be catastrophic once you clear the honeymoon phase. Littering. Honestly, to me, it's not even about environmentalism. You just have to be so incredibly selfish and lazy and entitled to feel like it's not your responsibility to take care of your own trash. That's bound to turn up elsewhere down the road. Well, that's the second time this one has come up on the list, so with any luck, we might be encouraging people who litter to tone it down a bit, if for no other reason than their own romantic interests. I had an ex where the following happened. My best friend's little sister died in a car crash, and I was torn up about it. He became indifferent towards me because I was, apparently, too depressed to be with. If someone can't handle being a decent human being when I'm heartbroken, what are they going to act like when it's my mum, my dad, dog even? Oops, sorry, but I don't want to hang out with you because you're sad. To everyone who went through something similar, all of those people suck and we're better off. Not everyone knows how to grieve, but we all find out one day. I hope you're all doing better. Being obsessed with social media or needing to document everything all the time and project a perfect version of their life. I had a boss like this. Everything was a frickin' photo shoot just so she could post on social media that she could prove to her haters that she had a life. Miserable. When you get home after the first date and they tagged and snapped several pictures of you during the hour you were together. Dating in LA, I learned fast if a girl is taking pictures of me right away that she's using me to make her ex jealous. Bad hygiene. I dated a girl with bad dental hygiene. I didn't think it would bother me as much as it did. You know it's bad when you're scared to kiss. Did you tell her? Not that it's your responsibility, but I learned that dental hygiene is not something that people talk about often. So if your parents didn't tell you how to do things properly, you might just not know and you'll never think about it. I remember when I was at my first job, looking up what's covered by my dental insurance, a coworker said she'd never been to the dentist in her life. She brushed once a day because that's what her parents taught her. She also had mouthwash at her desk. I thought it's because she took dental hygiene seriously when it was the opposite. Apparently, she sometimes shows up to work without brushing her teeth and would just use mouthwash. I realized that she wouldn't know that that's not good enough if it wasn't for me offhandedly mentioning I wasn't clear with what was covered by our insurance. She thought teeth cleaning at the dentist is the dentist brushing your teeth for you. Whew. Entitled behavior. People who act like the world owes them everything when they were raised with more than most people. People who demand respect but treat others poorly. My friend went on a date where the girl virtually had a tantrum at the waitstaff until she got what she wanted, when it was her screw-up in the first place. and then looked incredibly self-satisfied and smiled at him as if he should be proud of her. Nope, arrived separately and left separately. Years ago, I saw a couple seated at the table next to mine in a restaurant, and the woman demanded something that they stopped serving there. She was incredibly rude about berating the waiter for its removal, saying that they must still have the ingredients, and when the manager came out, she said that she deserved her meal free. It was at that point that her date stands up and tells her to get her own ride home and strolls out the door. It was a young couple too, like 20 or 21. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When someone makes me feel like my feelings are invalid or that theirs are more valid than mine, my mum does it and it's crushing. Same line as this, not trusting my judgment. I'm frugal. I like to plan for the worst and hope for the best. I've had exes talk me out of my frugal judgment and it screwed me over financially. Not believing dinosaurs are real. I went on a date with a girl who told me dinosaurs were placed by God to test our faith, and that's why carbon dating is a trick to get you into hell. There was no second date. I have a guy I work with who also doesn't believe dinosaurs existed. His logic is that the government clearly planted them to create tourism. He said, "What do you think? Someone just goes to a site, starts randomly digging, and just happens to find whole skeletons in the ground?" Ha! This man is my boss's supervisor. I can't imagine dating him. Someone who always talks but never really says anything. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Not having a capacity for compassion or empathy for others, including animals. Okay, to answer the many accusing comments that I'm getting, well, this is awkward. Folks, I'm not vegan. I'm really sorry if somehow my words led you to believe that, but I'm a filthy omnivore. I do love the passion of all these comments I'm getting though. The world needs more people like you. Also, I realize the moral and ethical dilemma of meat production. It's something I think about frequently. I try to give back to animal communities in other ways, supporting ethical farms, TNR feral colonies, fostering, rescue of hurt wildlife, stuff like that. Being rude to retail or service workers. My grandpa taught me long ago, if someone's nice to you but rude to the waiter or waitress, it's not a nice person. I have never forgotten it. Being too clingy too quickly. I had the girl tell me she loved me after 4 hours of talking, asking why I'm not responding to her messages and stuff, and it was an absolute no. I dated a guy, and the first month he was perfect, and I was quickly falling for him. One day he said, "My ex broke up with me and I screwed up his life for it. Haha. Turned all his friends against him. Don't screw with me." He said like it was funny and he was proud. Immediate red flag, and I instantly started thinking about how I've got to break up with him. Something similar happened to me with a guy that wanted to date me. He tried to impress me by bragging about how he'd lied in court about his ex to get full custody of the kids and ruined her life. If he was trying to be scary, it worked. My late father once tried to set me up with a woman from his church that he thought I should marry. I indulged him because, frankly, I was curious to see what traits he thought a good wife for me would have. I was visiting my parents at the time, and he invited her to lunch with us after church. I am not religious, but I used to indulge him on attending church on Sundays. By the way, I was seriously dating someone at the time, a woman who is now my wife, and he knew this. Another 5 minutes into the conversation, I mentioned something I'd read, and her immediate response was, and I quote, "Oh, I hate reading." All matter-of-fact like. I don't think I've ever lost interest in a conversation so quickly. She did not tick many other boxes either, but that was hilariously off base. Ooh, yep. You know, I like to think that I can mix with anyone from any walk of life, but that one statement is pretty much a libido killer right there. Also, I'm not making assumptions about people from the South this time. The author wrote that accent into the script. I've shared this before, but one time I went out on a first date with this girl I met online. I thought she was very attractive and we had so much in common that I thought she was perfect. In addition to that, we seemed to hit it off well through texts, so I figured the date would go well. We're at this bar and she suggests we play a people-watching game where we try to make up backstories for the people in there. I thought it sounded fun, especially since I played a similar game with friends on the train sometimes. Plus it felt like a good icebreaker to get us talking. Well, she managed to take all the fun out of the game by being ridiculously cruel in all her assumptions for no real reason at all. It felt like she was projecting issues she had onto these people. Like one guy was sitting at the bar alone and could have been waiting for someone, you never know, but because he was alone, he was apparently a freaking loser with no friends who hates his life. Completely killed the mood and I lost all interest in her after that. I just couldn't see myself going on a second date with someone like that, even if she checked all the other boxes. That's a really interesting way to conduct a personality test, without it feeling like a test. Did you match her stories or try to lighten her mood? How did she react to them? That's so incredibly fascinating to me. Being a cheater or being physically or emotionally aggressive to me or people and animals around me. The way a person treats their animals says a lot about them. I was seeing this guy for a couple of weeks. I stayed at his house for a weekend, and he had a dog. All this dog wanted was to be loved and petted and cuddled, but he would tell her no and use the fricking shock collar on the beep setting, sometimes worse to get her away from him. I noped right the F out of there. My dad thought I was being irrational when I told him I wasn't seeing him anymore because of the way he treats his dog. If you can't love an animal who just wants your attention and love in return, I think that says a lot about the kind of person you are. Ooh, I've gone on one too many first dates with people who just talked at me the entire time. To the point where if I'm on a date with someone new and they start doing this, my brain just starts to shut down and I immediately start losing interest. I get that people are nervous on first dates and probably talk more just to fill the silence, but don't you want to know who I am? Maybe just a little bit? Ask me some questions. Give yourself a break from talking. It blows my mind when this happens, and then at the end they say, "Oh, I really like you, you're great." But they literally know nothing about me because I just spent the last 2 to 3 hours listening to them talk about themselves the entire time. Anti-vaxxers. It's a deal breaker if they like me back. I can't date someone with awful taste. If they're rude or mean to anyone. I'm being asked about this, and yes, I mean rude or mean to anyone. Even in a situation where someone is being rude or mean to us, that doesn't mean that you have to be rude or mean back. Rude and mean are unwarranted in my mind. They're often unprovoked behaviors towards innocent people. If someone's being rude or mean to you, then you can stand up for yourself. But that's not the same as being rude or mean. You can criticize someone's terrible behavior without being rude or mean about their personality or looks or whatever. Many people seem to be conflating being assertive with being cruel, and I think these are very separate things. Racism. I've turned away a few dimes in my day because of their crappy attitude towards other races. I don't have time to harbor your misplaced anger, and we're all humans. Keep that crappy behavior away from me. Confederate flag displayed anywhere is an instant veto. They lost. Get over it. If I'm in a depressive mood, yes, I have depression, no, I don't let it control my life, and some days are better than others. By mood, I mean a bad depression day where I can't get out of bed. If they tell me to just get over it, or better yet, get mad at me for being sad, then we're done. Good news, I haven't had a depressive day in bed since leaving that one ex. Gatekeepers. You know, the sorts of people who think listening to modern music is, quote, gay, and that I should listen to what they listen to. The sort of people that forbid you from being involved with anything they don't like. Ableism. Ask a girl out, meet at the date, and all is going well until we start chatting about high school and these innocent regrets everyone has, like trying too hard to fit in with a certain crowd or going head over heels for honors programs, menial stuff. Except included in her regrets was doing a walkathon event for autism awareness, in which she called it a tard race. She then proceeded to give me her explicit opinion on how retards shouldn't be in school, don't deserve public education, and how they're basically non-human. Don't think I've ever been so suddenly disgusted by an individual. Gaslighting. Nah, that's just something you made up because you're freaking crazy. Someone who's overly judgmental or wishes death on someone just because they think differently to them or thinks they're the smartest person in the room. I met a guy like this and it came totally out of the blue for me because he had previously been everything I wanted. Then suddenly he's explaining to me why he hates most women and why the government needs to be redone with his values at the forefront. You know, a lot of these things seem like common sense. I dated a really great girl in high school. Cute, sweet as could be, big-hearted, but she and her family were just really, really into Jesus. And I'm most definitely not, so we dated for a very long time but never clicked on that deeply personal level that we both wanted. And so we went our separate ways on good terms, aided by her moving off for school. If they have the opinion that people who are poor just don't work enough and that they're lazy, that's bullcrap and I'm done talking to you. A person's character can be judged by the compassion they have for animals. So if the person, guy in my case, doesn't like animals or treats them badly, he's immediately out for me. Bad table manners, especially speaking with your mouth full of food that you've just chewed, and being disrespectful to family and friends, egotistical, huge turnoff. Gossipy and into status and cliques. Putting the milk in the bowl first. Being disrespectful to someone that's working low-paying customer service jobs. A job is a frickin' job. They are not beneath you. They have feelings just like you do. We're all trying to make it in this world. Who did we consider cray-cray until history proved them right all along? Harry Markopoulos spent years trying to convince everyone, investors, journalists, regulatory agencies and stuff, that Bernie Madoff was a fraud based on forensic accounting. Madoff was one of the most respected names on Wall Street, and despite the overwhelming evidence, nobody was willing to entertain the thought he might be running a Ponzi scheme. Harry's book, No One Would Listen, is a great account of financial detective work and just the abject frustration of being absolutely certain you're right, but nobody believing you. If it ever comes out that we're in a simulation, this guy being named Madoff will be the Easter egg I point to when I convince people that the devs used interns from time to time. Ludwig Boltzmann. His equations and formulas explained the physical properties of matter, but as it went against the accepted laws of physics at the time, he was ridiculed and ignored for years while fighting for atom theory to be accepted. Sadly, he self-deleted just 3 years before Ernest Rutherford discovered the nucleus of an atom, proving Boltzmann's theory. Ignaz Semmelweis. That guy who suggested that it might be a good idea to wash your hands before performing surgery. Semmelweis supposedly suffered a nervous breakdown and was committed to an asylum by his colleagues. He died 14 days later after being beaten by guards from a gangrenous wound on his right hand, which might have been caused by the beating. Semmelweis's practice earned widespread acceptance only years after his death, when Louis Pasteur confirmed the germ theory. Hemingway, before he finally ended things himself, became extremely paranoid the FBI was following him. His wife and people around him just thought he was mentally ill and grew deeply concerned. Hemingway went as far as getting electrotherapy at a psychiatric hospital to try and help with the perceived delusions. Turns out the FBI had been following and bugging him for years according to declassified files. In comparison, there was the sci-fi writer Philip K. Dick, who was convinced that the FBI was monitoring him, so he kept sending demand letters that they release his file. His daughter was interviewed years after he passed away. It was in the bonus features of the Scanner Darkly DVD, if I recall correctly. The interviewer said, "I heard you've actually seen your father's FBI file, and it's quite large." Yes, it is rather large, but the only thing in there are copies of his demand letters. On the other hand, Hemingway was being relentlessly surveyed for 20 years because of his perceived socialist tendencies, and although he may have been paranoid, that doesn't mean that he was wrong. In the days of landlines, my phone was tapped. I could hear a strange hollow sound and I knew someone was listening. I'd had a bad accident and was home for almost a year and involved in a lawsuit. I told my attorney about it. He told me the insurance company wouldn't bother. I mentioned it to my roommate. She told me I was crazy. I began to notice a van parked on my street. It was there for several days. I thought I was under surveillance. My attorney and roommate said I was crazy. A person came to my door asking questions about the neighborhood. They claimed to be from a real estate company. They didn't go to the other houses. I thought I was being watched. My attorney and roommate said I was crazy. Several weeks later, my roommate's boyfriend was arrested for stealing physical and intellectual property from IBM. It was the beginning of the tech era, and he stole millions in hardware and software and ideas. We were being watched to see if we were involved. The phone was tapped. We were under surveillance. We were taped. I wasn't crazy at all, just wrong about why they were doing it. In 1912, the meteorologist Alfred Wegener described what he called continental drift, an idea that culminated 50 years later in the modern theory of plate tectonics. Wegener expanded his theory in his 1915 book, The Origin of Continents and Oceans, starting from the idea, also expressed by his forerunners, that the present continents once formed a single landmass, later called Pangaea. Wegener suggested that these separated and drifted apart, likening them to icebergs of low-density granite floating on a sea of denser basalt. Supporting evidence for the idea came from the dovetailing outlines of South America's coast and Africa's west coast, and from the matching rock formations along these edges. Confirmation of their previous contiguous nature also came from the fossil plants Glossopteris and Gangomopteris, and the therapsid or mammal-like reptile Lystrosaurus, all widely distributed over South America, Africa, Antarctica, India, and Australia. The evidence for such an erstwhile joining of these continents was patent to field geologists working in the Southern Hemisphere. The South African Alex de Toit put together a mass of information in his 1937 publication Our Wandering Continents, and went further than Wegener in recognizing the strong links between the Gondwana fragments. Wegener's work was initially not widely accepted, in part due to a lack of detailed evidence. The Earth might have a solid crust and mantle and a liquid core, but there seemed to be no way that portions of the crust could move around. Distinguished scientists, such as Harold Jeffreys and Charles Schuchert, were outspoken critics of continental drift. Oh, that poor lady originally quoted as saying, "The dingo ate my baby." Got made fun of constantly, most notably in Seinfeld, The Simpsons, and I believe she went to jail because nobody believed her. Turns out, a dingo did eat her baby. She's still made fun of. This one is beyond messed up. Your child is taken from you by wild animals, then you're jailed for murdering your own kid and ridiculed the world over for your lame story as to what happened. And then, yeah, being right the whole time. For a very long time, the medical community thought that stomach ulcers were caused by stress. A doctor in Australia called Barry Marshall claimed they were wrong and that they were caused by an excess of certain bacteria, and the cure was simply antibiotics. The medical community ridiculed him and nearly ended his career. He eventually decided that the only way to prove he was right was to infect himself, develop the ulcers, and cure himself. In curing himself, he was proved right and won the Nobel Prize for his efforts, and now stomach ulcers are very easily treatable. They previously affected 1 in 10 people. What's sad about these stories is that somebody coming up with a theory like that seems to be exactly the sort of thing which should excite medical professionals, as it's not only challenging their views, but also proposing a more effective solution. It's easy for me to be wise in hindsight, but it isn't as if he was advising people to rub a rabbit's ears and the good vibes would make the ulcers go away. Courtney Love was warning everyone about Harvey Weinstein back in the late 90s, but everyone just wrote her off. She said, "If you're a woman in this industry and Weinstein invites you to one of his parties, don't go." I fully believe that most of the rumors and bad press about Courtney Love come from Hollywood attempting to silence her. Don't get me wrong, I don't think she's a saint, but she's been very vocal on social media about her experiences over the last few years, and I always wonder if we would have known about the Hollywood stuff sooner if she had been given a platform earlier. The fan that predicted the show How I Met Your Mother's message and was shamed only to be proved completely right in the finale. J. Harlan Bratz. He was a geologist that in the 1920s came up with a theory about why Dry Falls and the surrounding scablands of eastern Washington state were so sharp and abrupt, instead of smooth as should be with the general understanding of erosion, especially since the falls have no real river to speak of to create erosion. His theory was that a giant flood, created by an even more massive lake, ripped through the region millions of years ago, reshaping the landscape in a matter of days. He was laughed at and discredited in the geology community for almost 50 years, until someone discovered evidence in the 1950s of an ancient and massive lake that started just north of Montana that stretched all the way to southern Utah. The lake was believed to have been created by glacial dams, or ice walls, during the last ice age. It would fill up over thousands of years and then hit a point where the glacial dam broke, and the lake water would fire out the beak like a water cannon, drain the lake, and reshape the entire region over several days as the water flowed towards the ocean. This happened several times. Since the flood that carved the Dry Falls likely started from the Lake Missoula area in modern-day Montana, it was named the Great Missoula Flood. Bratz was given an award in 1979 for his contribution to geology when he was 96 years old. He joked, "All of my enemies are dead, so I have no one to gloat to." Martha Mitchell. She was the wife of Nixon's AG, John Mitchell. She was outspoken in the extreme and was one of the first to talk openly about what really happened around Watergate. Since she was also known to love her martinis, she was widely written off as a crazy drunk woman. She was kidnapped by Nixon's personal lawyer and injected with tranquilizers to keep her quiet. Later, behind the scenes, a White House doctor began heavily sedating her, and her husband locked her away from the press. Nobody believed her until Nixon resigned and the story came out. To this day, most people only really remember her as that loudmouth Martha Mitchell. Nobody was ever prosecuted for how she was treated because they wanted the nation to heal after Watergate and enter into a new era of bipartisanship. So guys like Roger Stone got away with it. See, that all worked out well. Yep, good thing we fully closed that partisan gap forever. Don't worry, Martha Mitchell, your subjugation paved the way to… Actually, it's better that you don't see what we have now. When the Civil War broke out, everyone on both sides thought it would be a quick victory. However, Sherman kept saying that it would be a bloodbath that would drag on for years. His superiors decided he was insane and sent him out west to fight the Indians or Native Americans just to get rid of him. After it all came true and they needed some better generals, they said, maybe we should bring back that Sherman guy. Yes, public opinion is rarely kind towards realists or pessimists during wars. During the American Revolutionary War, the British also felt the same towards Cassandras like General Gage and later Clinton. One was sacked and the other's army was denuded in favor of Cornwallis. Rather than accept a war of attrition, the British government preferred foolhardy yet aggressive generals like Burgoyne and Cornwallis and reaped the consequences. Before World War II, Japanese ultranationalists wanted to assassinate Admiral Yamamoto, the successful planner of Pearl Harbor, because he kept saying inconvenient truths like, "In 6 months, the Americans will overwhelm us," since America can easily outproduce Japan's manufacturing capacities and rebuild massive fleets. Jon Snow, and yes, that is his name. He was laughed at for believing that multiple cholera outbreaks could be traced back to a specific source and that it was due to contaminated water, essentially making him one of the fathers of epidemiology. He has a fascinating life that went beyond that as well. The Radium Girls. When radium had just come to the US and was being marketed on dials for war and watches, girls used their lips to fix the paintbrushes to make their numbers and dials perfect. Eventually, they started suffering horrible, painful experiences due to the radium. These girls fought for years to figure out A, what was wrong with them, B, who was responsible, and C, how they were going to pay their bills and support their families. It's a horrible injustice. These girls needed support and validation that they weren't crazy, that it was radium, and it took far too long and too many deaths for it to finally happen. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I was in Boy Scout camp, we had this counselor named Don. He was kind of odd. He knew everything about trees and only really talked about trees. We'd just gotten back from a hike that Don was on with us, and we were just sitting around talking, and he suddenly goes, "You know, they're gonna let girls into the Boy Scouts soon." And we were all like, "Yeah, okay, Don." But sure enough, less than 3 years later, they did it. Michael Burry, the first guy to predict the 2008 housing market crash. He was a hedge fund manager for Scion Capital at the time, and basically bet his entire fund's liquidity, like all the money the fund had, that there'd be a crash. Nobody believed him except for a few other people who also bet against the market. Several of his clients sued him for tying their money up in what they considered to be a foolish bet, all to have him be right in the end. He made his fund something like $1.3 billion, and the value increased about 489%. The movie The Big Short is all about him and the few other people who were wise enough to bet against the market at the time. I've watched it like 5 times in order to try to understand exactly what happened, but I still don't fully get it. I recommend it to anyone who's interested. Fun fact, but Michael Burry was also ahead of the curve in the recent GameStop surge. I think he had something like 1.2 million shares of GameStop months before the price shot up. I might need to fact-check myself, though. The ex-husband of my ex-girlfriend. Turns out he wasn't the crazy one after all. He kept trying to tell me, and if I would have listened from the beginning, I could have saved 4 years of my life. The classic example, of course, is Cassandra. In Greek mythology, she was cursed to know the future, but for no one to believe her when she told them the truth. Johnny Rotten said in an interview that he knew Jimmy Savile was into all kinds of, quote, seediness. People dismissed it as typical Johnny Rotten anti-establishment talk for which he was famous. As it turned out, he was right. Joe Canseco. He revealed that a bunch of baseball players, like Mark McGwire, Rafael Palmeiro, and a few others, were doing performance-enhancing substances. Nobody believed him for years until everyone else got caught doing those exact substances. About 10 years ago, there was this stoner who'd always hang around the shop that I played Magic the Gathering at. One day, he told me that he didn't trust Jared from Subway. I said there was nothing to worry about, and the only thing that Jared did was eat sandwiches. He said there was something real sinister about Jared, and that he could tell just by looking at him. Well, he was right. I was right about my now disowned cousin. He kept stealing from me, which was why my family felt it was no big deal. But it escalated. It went from stealing candy, to my things, to cash, and after that I asked them how much longer they'd support him and call me selfish for, quote, not sharing. The line was finally crossed when he stole our grandmother's credit cards and her car. She finally wrote him off the will. This was after he'd stolen all of her jewelry, including the last present, an anniversary ring, that my grandfather was ever to give her. Oh, but he tried to say that our family kicked him out just because he was gay. No, None of us cared about that. It was because he was a thief. His friends have bailed him out of jail and then dropped him when he steals from them. But he claims the world is just unfair to him. Now he milks his pity story and milks the 'my family disowned me because I'm gay' story to everyone he begs from. I learned this when he tried to do it to one of my friends. Corey Feldman. The guy went on national TV to tell everyone that there was a network of people taking advantage of young up-and-comers in Hollywood and that he himself had been taken advantage of in the worst way. And people laughed at him and shunned him. And then it came out that pretty much everything he was saying was true. The people who were tortured as part of MKUltra. Imagine trying to convince the people around you that the government is trying to make you crazy with mind control, only for years later to find out that not only was it true, but that you wouldn't get compensation for it, and you were subject to illegal human experimentation. The people who discovered prions. All the other biologists thought they were crazy to suggest one protein could be an infectious agent. Nope, those biologists were wrong and Nobel Prizes were awarded. See, despite these scientists getting shamed up until they're vindicated, I'm at least somewhat happy that once the community is proven wrong, they tend to actually dispense rewards and grants and things, unlike just quietly removing these people and never talking about them again. Sinead O'Connor. Young Redditors might not know who she is, but she was a singer-songwriter from Ireland who was a staple in the alternative music scene during the late 80s and early to mid-90s, who had some crossover hits. Anyway, at the height of her popularity, she was the musical guest on Saturday Night Live after cancelling an earlier scheduled spot in protest against the guest host, which was some dumb idiot stand-up comic from the 80s called Andrew Dice Clay, who was described by Scott Thompson as, "It's as if someone took your grandmother, the one who can't speak English, and taught her to swear phonetically, gave her a special on HBO and made her a star." Anyway, during Sinead's performance, she sang an a cappella version of Bob Marley's War, changing the lyrics to make it about the mistreatment of children instead of racism. At the end of the performance, she shouted something like, "Fight the real enemy," and ripped up a picture of the Pope. In the following weeks, people lost their minds, and on the next episode of Saturday Night Live, they had at least 3 sketches that tore her apart. A few years later, the Catholics scandal broke out internationally. Mainstream culture in the 90s was intense. It wasn't that far removed from satanic panic levels. Bart Simpson was legitimately considered a danger to family values, parents were protesting Mortal Kombat, those parental advisory stickers were introduced for music, and churches were still considered morally infallible. The progress still happening now with transparency into the Catholic Church, Boy Scouts and stuff, would have been unfathomable at the time. There was that one journalist, Gary Webb, who uncovered the truth that the CIA aided and abetted Nicaraguan Contra rebels in funneling white snow into inner-city communities. My mum. Turns out being emo really was just a phase. The people who said that the government was indeed spying on its citizens. The doctor who found COVID in China was arrested and then later died in a quarantine hospital after developing complications from COVID. My wife, who never liked my mum's husband. He apparently made a pass at her before we were married, and I just wrote it off as Bob being Bob, because it was honestly semi-innocent, and at the time he and my mum were newlyweds. But over the years we started finding out he was hitting my mother, he made a pass at my sister, he was constantly cheating on my mum, he got caught trying to take a stealthy picture of my friend's underage sister, and he punched my mum in the head outside on the ice, causing her to hit her head on the pavement, fracturing her skull, and causing an almost fatal brain hemorrhage. She needed 2 surgeries and now deals with balance issues and almost complete loss of taste and smell and hearing in one ear. He's never faced any consequences for anything, because for reasons I can't quite understand, local law enforcement officers in their podunk town take his side every time she calls the cops on him. One time they even took her to jail because his drunk butt fell in a walk-in pantry where they were having an argument and he called the cops and said she beat him up. He's literally twice her size. He's moved out and they're getting a divorce now. I haven't kicked his butt because I live 1,000 miles away, I don't know where he lives, and I'm the sole breadwinner for my wife and 2 daughters. If I go to jail, they'll become homeless. My mum doesn't want him in jail yet because he pays the bills, and if he stops working, she loses her much-needed health insurance and her home. The divorce trial is just around the corner, and my sister and friend's sister have agreed to testify against him. So we're gonna see how that goes. In the 2012 presidential debates between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, both were asked what the greatest foreign threats to America were. Mitt Romney said Russia and became the butt of jokes on both sides of the aisle for it. Didn't he know the Cold War was over? Anyway, there's plenty about the guy I don't like, but I think about that answer a surprising amount as politics unfurl now. I almost feel like I'd have to apologize if I ever met him for how stupid I and everyone else found him at the time. My tattoo artist, not a Donald Trump follower, who during a 6-hour session described to me exactly what would happen if Biden won, but not by a landslide. I thought he was embracing a doomsday mentality. Every word was correct. Weird Al. He's actually a very wholesome, healthy guy with tons of energy and nobody can say anything negative about him. One of our D&D party members was hiding in a tree when the rest of the party was trying to negotiate, and we got captured except the one in the tree. Learned recently that my grandpa was right all along. My grandpa was a dentist. He mentored my current dentist. Saw my dentist the other day and he was going on and on about how my grandpa was doing things 40 years ago that he was mocked for endlessly by the dental community and told he was crazy. Those things my crazy grandpa were doing are now being seen as modern dentistry today. My dentist said he feels so happy for my grandpa and wishes he was alive to see this. The famous Swift quote applies. When a true genius appears in the world, you may know him by this sign, that the dunces are all in confederacy against him. Had to Google this to find out that it was in fact Jonathan Swift who quoted this, not Taylor. Unfortunately, we can't make this saying common knowledge because then every idiot conspiracy theorist in the world will feel bolstered by the knowledge that they are the one true genius. 2007 Britney Spears when she cut her hair. We thought she was nuts then. She could be, I don't follow her news. But after the stuff in 2020, we can all probably relate in some way. I kept telling people that Apple deliberately sabotages their phones to stop working over time via their updates, and that it doesn't matter if you reject the update, it will happen anyway. And lo and behold, Apple was caught out using planned obsolescences via updates to sabotage their own phones to twist its customers' arms into buying new ones. They said I was being paranoid. Well, who's paranoid now, Laura? Who's paranoid now? Congresswoman Barbara Lee was the only congressperson out of 535 members who voted no on the Authorized Use of Military Force Act after the September 11th attacks. There were also 12 present or not voting recorded. In her words, it was a blank check to the president to attack anyone involved in the September 11th event. Anywhere in any country without regard to our nation's long-term foreign policy, economic and national security interests, and without time limit. In granting these overly broad powers, the Congress failed its responsibility to understand the dimensions of its declaration. I could not support such a grant of war-making authority to the president. I believe it would put more innocent lives at risk. The president has the constitutional authority to protect the nation from further attack, and he has mobilized the armed forces to do just that. The Congress should have waited for the facts to be presented and then acted with fuller knowledge of the consequences of our action. For her vote, she received death threats, a damaged political career, and she was called insane, a traitor, and a communist. And she was 100% right. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.